Good morning. Today, the subcommittee on energy will now come to order. Today we will hear from a number of witnesses on the saving energy legislation to improve energy efficiency and storage. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Today, the subcommittee convenes for a hearing focused on legislative proposals to bolster energy efficiency and energy storage. Through the implementation of these policies, the committee will boost consumer cost savings, offset energy supply demand, reduce air pollution, and advance job creation. The flexibility and reliability of our nation's grid is enhanced by energy storage capabilities. Energy producers use a variety of these economically and environmentally beneficial technologies to store excess energy from power sources. Energy producers later release the stored energy in response to energy generation demands, service disruptions, or non-dispatch energy generation. Bills up for discussion today, which includes H.R. 1714, H.R. 2909, and H.R. 4447, will amplify the deployment of this strategy. Energy efficiency is an equally important tool that harnesses technology to meet our energy needs through smart energy use. According to a recent American Council of Energy Efficient Economy report, enhancing economy-wide efficiency standards could cut both energy use and greenhouse gas emissions in half by the year 2050. This is why I'm pleased to discuss H.R. 3962, H.R. 5650, and H.R. 5758 at today's hearing. Extensive efficiency of residential appliances, lighting systems, and buildings alone will curtail 550 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. This amounts to the emissions from burning 606 billion tons of coal. The intensity of energy use is contingent upon geographic location. Case in point, Chicago heat waves and winters. However, a typical household may save up to 25% on their utility expenses through energy efficiency measures. In light of this, I remain deeply disturbed by the department's failure to meet legal obligations for a new efficiency standards, and I am puzzled by this administration's continuous request to slash funding for related programs. Therefore, I look forward to today's discussion on these policies that require active participation from the Department of Energy, from states, and from industry to implement these mechanisms to the benefit of ratepayers and consumers. I want to thank my colleagues, both on the committee and off the committee, for their contributions to today's legislative hearing. With that, I now am honored to recognize my friend, my colleague, the great gentleman from the great state of Michigan, the great ranking member, Fred Great Upton, for 5 minutes.
I'm going to have to get you a MAGA hat with Fred on it tonight. Thank you, my friend, indeed my friend, and chairman of this great subcommittee for sure. This is going to be a good hearing, and today's legislative hearing is going to focus on 6 energy bills focused on energy efficiency and grid storage. Pleased that most of these bills are indeed bipartisan and reflect close cooperation and compromise among our many members. I also want to welcome back Under Secretary Menzies, Mark, back to the committee to provide testimony on this first panel. Under his leadership, he served as chief counsel of the committee. He helped us enact the Energy Policy Act of '05. And on the second panel, we have a range of witnesses representing energy efficiency, advocates, architects, home builders, energy service companies that retrofit federal buildings. I look forward to gathering their views and suggestions to perfect these bills. And as we lay the framework for a modern electricity system, we know that advances in energy storage and energy efficiency indeed will be critical. Not only will they have the potential to provide substantial benefits to consumers in the form of lower electricity bills, which we all want, but they're also going to help us balance the power grid and use less energy, which will obviously reduce emissions. DOE is dedicating substantial resources, cutting across multiple program offices in the national labs to accelerate the development, commercialization, and utilization of next-generation energy storage and energy efficiency technologies. I look forward to receiving an update from DOE on the programs already in place and the department's plan for the future. And as we work to modernize the electric grid, one of our top priorities is certainly going to be to make sure that new technologies being developed and commercialized are resilient to cyber threats. While it doesn't appear that these bills address cyber today, I would like to explore opportunities to address this critical need as well. With that, I want to turn to the bills to make a few remarks. I'm pleased to support H.R. 4447, Expanding Access to Sustainable Energy Act, introduced by Mr. O'Halloran and Mr. Mullen, targeted bill to provide energy storage and microgrid assistance in rural areas. Also certainly support H.R. 5650, Federal Energy and Water Management Performance Act, introduced by Mr. Welch and Kinzinger, to codify DOE's existing federal emergency management program, which helps federal agencies meet energy-related goals and facilitates public-private partnerships. It's a good program. It's been in existence for a good number of years, and it should be authorized. We also have H.R. 5758, Ceiling Fan Improvement Act of 2020, introduced by Mr. Guthrie and Schakowsky, to make technical corrections to the energy conservation standards for ceiling fans, narrow fix for a specific type of ceiling fan, and it should be a no-brainer for us to support this bill as well. The other 3 bills before us may require additional work before moving through the full committee. H.R. 2909, Promoting Grid Storage Act of 2019, implements a new government spending program that could be duplicative of existing programs and may not serve the interest of taxpayers or consumers. H.R. 1744, the Storage Act, which does impose a new regulatory mandate on states to consider technologies that may be infeasible or too costly, and H.R. 3962, the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act, which is the kitchen sink of energy efficiency provisions. This bill has been around for a number of Congresses, and some of the provisions, especially the energy codes, have been the subject of disagreement among stakeholders. With that, I look forward to our witnesses today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Back, the chair now recognizes Mr. Pallone, the chairman of the full committee, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to begin by welcoming back to the committee the Undersecretary, who served as a key staffer on the Committee on Energy Matters for many years. Today, the subcommittee will review 6 bipartisan bills that continue our work to combat the climate crisis by improving energy efficiency and investing in battery storage infrastructure. Energy efficiency is a critical tool in our efforts to address climate change while also saving consumers money on their electric bills. Residential and commercial buildings contribute nearly 40% to our nation's carbon pollution, and today we're considering several bills that support the use of energy efficiency technologies in residential, commercial, and industrial sectors. Representatives Welch and McKinley have introduced H.R. 3962, the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act, which includes a suite of measures to make buildings, manufacturers, and the federal government more energy efficient. The bill strengthens national building codes to ensure new homes and buildings are more energy efficient, and it helps manufacturers and the federal government transition to technologies that will reduce energy consumption. While there are many important provisions in this bill, there are a few provisions that concern me. The bill repeals Section 433 of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, which phases out the use of fossil fuel energy in federal buildings by 2030. To achieve a 100% clean economy, the federal government must lead by reducing its energy consumption and carbon pollution, and I can't support walking away from this strong standard. I'm also uncomfortable allowing companies to self-certify that their products meet Energy Star standards. Consumers must have certainty that an Energy Star product they buy will actually save the amount of energy a company claims that it will. The subcommittee will also review H.R. 5650, the Federal Energy and Water Management Performance Act, introduced by Representatives Welch and Kinzinger. The federal government is the nation's largest energy buyer and consumer. The bill will drive major energy and water use reductions in federal buildings over the next decade. We're also considering H.R. 5758, the Ceiling Fan Improvement Act of 2020, which was introduced by Representatives Guthrie and Schakowsky, and this bill provides a technical fix for large diameter ceiling fan efficiency standards. The subcommittee also has 3 energy storage bills to consider. They speed up adoption of this important technology. Building new energy storage infrastructure is critical to expanding renewable energy technology use. As the U.S. brings online more wind, solar, and other renewable, energy storage is key to providing reliable electric service. And today we'll be reviewing Representative Caston's H.R. 2909, the Promoting Grid Storage Act, and this bill establishes programs and grants for energy storage, research, technical assistance, and storage system pilot projects. H.R. 1744, the Storage Act, introduced by Representative Takano, amends the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1978, or PURPA, to require states to consider energy storage when developing energy plans. And H.R. 4447, the EASE Act, introduced by Representatives O'Halloran and Mullen, sets up a grant program to assist rural electric cooperatives with energy storage and microgrid projects. So this committee will continue to work in a bipartisan fashion to boost energy efficiency, cut carbon pollution, and reduce consumers' bills. But unfortunately, the Trump administration is moving in the opposite direction with the budget it released this week. The Trump budget cuts clean energy research, cuts funding for the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy by an appalling 75%, and zeroes out weatherization assistance for low-income homeowners. These are all devastating cuts that would seriously undermine our ability to combat the climate crisis. But despite this administration's ongoing denial of the climate crisis, this committee will continue its work to modernize energy infrastructure, reduce carbon pollution, and make homes, businesses, and federal buildings more energy efficient. And we have 6 bipartisan bills before us that accomplish all these goals, and I commend the sponsors for the hard work and yield back to you, Mr. Chair. Oh, I can yield to, where's the gentleman from California, Mr. McNeary?
I thank the chairman for yielding. I want to speak up briefly in favor of the Welch-McKinley H.R. 3962. Welch-McKinley strengthens national building codes to make new homes and commercial buildings more energy efficient, and the code writing process more transparent. It will deliver significant cost and energy savings for families without imposing any new mandates or increasing the deficit, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. It's my understanding that the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Walden, yields his allotted time, 5 minutes, to the gentleman, Mr. Latta. Mr. Latta is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for holding this legislative hearing today, and I thank all of our witnesses for agreeing to testify today. Before we discuss the bills that are before us, I want to express my disappointment that we are not also discussing legislation I introduced, H.R. 2101, the Energy Star Program Integrity Act. No other energy efficiency program has been as popular or effective as the Energy Star program. This voluntary program allows manufacturers to obtain Energy Star labeling for products if specific energy savings guidelines are met, benefiting consumers that are looking to purchase energy-efficient products. Technologies that have complied with these guidelines have resulted in tens of billions of dollars in energy savings for families and businesses and a dramatic reduction in emissions. It is my hope that the majority will work with us to move H.R. 2101, which will improve and strengthen this great program. And before yielding back, I'll ask if any other members on our side would like the balance of my time. And seeing them, Mr. Chairman, I thank you again for holding today's hearing, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. It's my understanding that in the president's budget, he cut the Energy Star program out of the budget.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if we could move forward with the bill, I'd greatly appreciate working with the majority. Thank you.
All right. The chair now recognizes, the chair would like to remind members that pursuant to committee rules, all members' written opening statements shall be made part of the record. Now I would like to welcome our first witness for today's hearing, the Honorable Mark Menzies, the Undersecretary of Energy, and I certainly want to welcome you here, Mr. Secretary. And I want to thank you for joining us today. And we all are sitting at the edge of our seats awaiting your testimony. Before we begin, though, I would like to explain, and you are fully aware of that, but it's on the script here that I have to read, so bear with me. I'd like to explain the lighting system. In front of you is a series of lights, as if you have noticed. The light will initially be green at the start of your opening statement. The light will turn yellow when you have 1 minute remaining. Please begin to wrap up your testimony at that point. The light will turn red when your time expires. Mr. Undersecretary, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Pallone, Chairman Rush, Ranking Member Upton, and indeed it is an honor and a privilege to be back before this committee. I look forward to this hearing. Indeed, on the way over here, I was excited to hear that over in the other body, Chairman Murkowski and Ranking Member Manchin has announced that they're going to introduce a comprehensive energy bill later this month, and so the work that we're doing here today is going to be very meaningful, and it is hoped that your committee can get together with the full committee and put some bills together, and perhaps we can help get bills considered in conference, much like we did back some many years ago now, sadly, when we last did a comprehensive energy bill, which was bipartisan and had full support and embraced, a lot of the policies that today I'm privileged enough to be Undersecretary of Energy over the Department of Energy, and I'm actually implementing some of those very same provisions, and typically on any day walking down the hall, I'm either praised for some of the foresight that Congress had seen and given the Department of Energy authorities to do things, but on other days I'm also blamed for some of the things that we put in that bill that perhaps can be improved upon. So really it's an honor to be here, and I look forward to our discussion today. I'm going to touch on the 6 bills that we have, and I just want to remind everybody that the administration has not taken a formal position yet on these bills. We have provided some technical assistance in the drafting of these bills, particularly the Ceiling Fan Act, which I think has been touched on by members, and so I won't go into that, but we did provide the technical assistance, and we believe that the bill is now technically drafted in a way that can go forward. Regarding the Promoting Grid Storage Act, H.R. 2909, so this requires the Secretary to establish a cross-cutting national program for research in the energy storage systems, components, and materials, and it will require DOE to provide technical assistance in grant programs. Of course, the department recognizes the critical importance for providing the technical assistance to state, local, and relevant stakeholders, but indeed, we recognize the importance of storage generally. This is the true breakthrough technology that we have to achieve, that as we make our grid more flexible and we're bringing more renewables on, we need to be able to develop storage technologies of all types to be able to address the demands and the needs of the future on a more flexible grid. Indeed, the department has recently announced the Energy Storage Grand Challenge. This builds on the President's fiscal year 20 budget for promoting the Advanced Storage Initiative, which began at about $158 million, and we are now building on that to expand it to over $282 million. This is going to be an integrated department R&D strategy to focus across the department and drive American leadership in energy storage. Our department's grand challenge takes a comprehensive approach to energy storage, recognizing the value of different technology pathways and providing the full range of services, as I mentioned, required by the grid and transportation infrastructure to ensure that our system is reliable, resilient, and safe. Our challenge includes traditional bidirectional electricity storage, that would be batteries, flywheels, pump storage, hydropower, and compressed air energy storage, thermal and chemical storage, and technologies that increase the flexibility of electricity generation and demand. Now, this is a cross-cutting challenge, so we draw on many offices and agencies within our department. It's a collaborative effort leveraging our efforts by the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, our Office of Electricity, our Offices of Science, Fossil Energy and Nuclear, as well as our Loan Programs Office and ARPA-E. Existing technologies include the batteries, the pump storage, controllable loads, distributed energy resource management, microgrids, power system planning and operations, hybrid systems, power plant dispatchability, and more importantly, cybersecurity. And it's on this foundation that the Energy Storage Grand Challenge will develop an R&D roadmap over the course of fiscal year 2020 to guide future department efforts. I will say that when you look at the legislation, to the extent, as Ranking Member Upton had said, if we can look at considering adding a cybersecurity component of this, because again, we make things more flexible, we do not want to make them more vulnerable. HR 4447 that members have mentioned, this appears to be expanding a lot of what is in 2909, to the co-ops, and that it's also modeled after, the Sunda project. And this was a project that led to co-op solar capacity increasing tenfold in 5 years. And it's been a tremendous market success for solar technologies, really without any federal mandate. So that bill is for your consideration. HR 1744. This is, this would add the energy storage systems to the list of strategies that states should consider. This is your classic 111D. So this is the national standards that, would require the states to look at this. A couple of things on Purple 111D for your consideration. One, consider that the world has changed back in the day when Purple was passed, where you may have had only 1 or 2 companies within a state. Remember today, because of now our integrated electricity markets, you may have multiple stakeholders in different states. And so when you put this on the states, there may be companies that have to deal with 11 or 20 or more states. So each state will have to do it. So just keep that in mind when you put this in Purple 111D. It's a good thing also to consider to give credit to states that might have already considered this, so you wouldn't have to have them redo it again. And we found that it was important to consider not only prior actions, but a timetable. So you want to incent them to take timely action, but you may consider sunsetting it just to make sure that you send the right message to the states. On HR 3962, this is a very comprehensive bill and quite creative in many respects. You all have heard what the bill does. Because I know I'm already short on time, I just want to comment on a couple of things. One, The bill,
But continue.
do you mind if I just
Yeah,
roll
please,
through this real
please,
quick? I
please
apologize. I
continue.
know y'all are tight on time as
Yeah,
well, but you
yeah.
get my
Please,
comments.
please continue.
Congressman McMurney made the point about being voluntary, and indeed, certainly, it appears that way. There are some provisions in there that talk about how DOD, shall update the milestones and shall provide technical assistance. The art will be in the draft, and we want to make sure that the department can work in a way to make sure that the goals of the bill are accomplished should it become law. We don't do everything that's in the bill there. We're not necessarily codifying things there. But on some of the creative things, for example, on the rebate programs, there's a rebate program for motors, there's a rebate program for transformers. We don't do that now, so there's some new things in that comprehensive bill. It is significantly broad that we are continuing to look at that bill, but I will say, from personal experience, that's the kind of bill that would fit in well with a comprehensive view as you're looking at these issues, and if you begin to work with the other body toward a comprehensive solution to some of these problems. Finally, the 5650, the Federal Energy and Water Management Performance Contract. I'll just say our comments here is that it does codify the FEMP program. It does create a FEMP director that would make it a career SES. That's a little bit different. Right now, the secretary has that authority. It's delegated to the FEMP director. In addition to the current law that it codifies, it does add water performance requirements for the federal agencies. It creates a new metric and a new baseline, and it changes the baseline from an earlier date to 2018. It also provides different metrics to the current baseline, so there'll have to be a transition if you want to see a comparison of what we've been doing since 2003. And I think with that, I think I've hit on all of my points. I know I've exceeded my time. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I'm ready to answer any questions that you might have.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. We have concluded opening statements, and we will move now to member questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to ask questions of our witnesses, and I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Before I start my questioning, in my opening statement, I mentioned that H.R. 1714, but I want to correct that. It's H.R. 1744, Mr. Takano's bill, the Storage Act. So I want to clarify the record. Undersecretary Menzies, I want to again thank you for appearing before the subcommittee today. And though I appreciate your attendance, I remain dissatisfied with DOE's inaction on efficiency standards under the Trump administration. It is my intent to use the balance of my time to address these long-standing concerns. The President's most recent budget address has this quote, and I quote, "Burdensome energy efficiency regulations," end of quote, "to create," a new quote, "a more effective implementation of energy efficiency standards program." Secretary Menzies, how are delayed efficiency standards and proposed funding cuts to energy efficiency programs contributing to, again, quote, "a more effective implementation of energy standards program"?
Thank you for the question, Chairman Rush. As all of you have heard me testify before, we have a full endorsement of catching up to getting out these appliance standards. From administration to administration, it has always been a category of failure to meet statutory deadlines category on appliance standards. We inherited it. and we are trying to reduce it. I've pledged that we will strive in every way to meet the statutory deadlines. So we're committed to meeting our legal obligations, including all the deadlines. I'm happy to report that just since last year, we have issued 26 notices relating to energy conservation standards and 14 notices relating to test procedures, including 7 final rules. I will say that under our leadership, we have heard from you, and we have been doing our best to get these appliance standards out. It's a complicated process. It's not a simple thing, but we are doing our best, and we are proud as to what we, have accomplished, certainly since I've been over there.
I'm really concerned because we the department does not have the discretion to choose when or if it must follow congressionally mandated laws or obligations. Do you agree with that?
No, sir. I mean, we have full intention of following all of our legal obligations. In fact, as I just mentioned, it is a high priority of ours, and we work with the office regularly to try to meet these demands. It's not a simple thing to simply go there. There's testing and there's evaluation, and there's quite a stakeholder process involved. But you can compare our record against any prior administration on following the law and trying to get these appliance standards out. We've also taken the initiative, to issue some new categories for appliance standards, because one thing, as you know, it's important to continue to meet consumer satisfaction and performance. We buy appliances so that they perform the job that we expect them to do. Energy efficiency, for the sake of efficiency, sometimes erodes the performance standards. So it's important that as we get these appliance standards out, that it actually does a job that the customers buy the appliance for. So for us, it's important to make sure that we get customer choice, consumer satisfaction, and performance standards while reducing energy efficiency. Increasing energy efficiency.
The chair yields back. Now I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Upton, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to say we appreciate the work that you've done on the new standards because it ought to be a focus of the department. We've had hearings in the past years, and I think all of us on both sides have been somewhat frustrated and appreciate the work in that regard. I'd like to focus my attention really this morning on H.R. 3962, the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act. Supported by a number of businesses and product manufacturers, but there are provisions, controversy, I guess you could say, as it relates to the building codes that are opposed by some groups, such as the home builders, who are going to be on the next panel after you depart. So, 2 things. What is DOE doing in the building code space today, and how will this bill, legislation, change that status quo? And second, as it relates to this, there always seems to be concern as it relates to the payback period for the new code requirements and the increased cost that consumers are going to be forced to pay. And of course, from the home builder's perspective, it's always the home buyer is going to spend, they know what their X amount is that they're going to spend on the house. And so the home builder is trying to get as many things as they can within that X amount. But what is DOE doing to ensure that the model building codes are both energy efficient as well as cost effective as it relates to these provisions? Something that continues to haunt us as we try to get a bill through the committee and through the legislative process.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Upton, for the question. And as I'd mentioned, this is quite a comprehensive bill in many areas. Regarding the manufacturing. So, we support research technologies on the federal buildings. We set the standards for green building certification, system requirements for new federal buildings, the major renovations, and revising performance standards for construction of new federal buildings and major renovations. We had mentioned our FEMP office. We establish standards for the federal green buildings, the third-party certification that we have going on now. We strive right now to set and certify the energy and water performance requirements for federal buildings. You know, this is also with GSA that we work with. And we maintain a catalog of the products, you know, that have been designed, and we work with GSA to make sure that these standards are met and that federal buildings, you know, contain in that. So we have a fairly comprehensive approach today on this, and indeed, you know, it is important because a significant amount of our energy that's being used today is in buildings. So it's important that we get goals out there that that industry, you know, can hit and meet. There are some technical probably details in that bill that I'd probably need to get with staff as we review, you know, how the language is written regarding our role in setting these standards and increasing the standards and getting them out. So I'm happy to work with your staff. You know,
Yeah, if you
looking
can
way.
do that, I mean, as, you know, I'm not quite sure what the time frame will be. This is a legislative hearing, and I presume that at some point in the near future, we'll have a markup in the subcommittee and move forward. But if you can help us as we try to reach a consensus, and you know, the goal being that most of us here would be in support of the bill. It's sort of hard to be opposed to energy efficiencies in federal buildings. So if you can help us to really make sure that the bill is the best that it can be, and to bring us together, that'd be useful, and I would encourage the department to do that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I will.
Gen-
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Peters for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. In your testimony, you mentioned using ARPA-E as a tool for developing new technologies of storage. I'm sure you're aware that the administration budget proposal zeroes that out. Do you have a comment on that? Yes, I assume you think that's a bad idea.
Well, we are committed to following congressional appropriations and direction. Our proposal focuses on ways that we think we can really target basic R&D. That's an important distinction to keep in mind. ARPA-E tends to focus on more of the applied, so our applications of technologies that have been developed. We look at focusing primarily on breakthrough technologies. We talked about storage.
What would be the vehicle for that outside of ARPA-E?
Well, there's the way the department currently is working. So we issue funding opportunity announcements now, much like the bill that we talked about on storage. It would be that Congress would appropriate monies, might have some directive language in it, but we would put together a cross-cutting plan to issue a funding opportunity where applicants can come in, industry, universities, not-for-profits, they come in, there's a cost share requirement, but we push this out, and we have, under this administration at the department, we've actually established an Office of Technology Transfer for the first time. So it's important to try to get, you know, kind of cross that valley of death, so to speak, so that when you come up with a good idea and it works maybe in the laboratory or maybe a pilot project, then you can push it out into the commercial area. So ARPA-E has a separate budget from the department generally, is an interesting creation of it. So it has its separate budget. So just keep that in mind when you look at the budget proposal. So,
And the vehicle for what you just talked about was it Office of Technology Transfer? So
that's one of the offices there, but it would.
How much funding does that get currently?
I'm not sure of the funding, but what it serves more of a function. It's a function to work with our program offices that issue the funding opportunities, so that when there are technologies that are pushed out
Right.
At the department, it goes through. What that office does is it pushes it out into the commercial
And
sector.
there's a cost associated with that, too. There's a appropriation associated with that, is there not?
I honestly would have to check. I'm not sure if it's in the administration budget of the department or if it's a special line item. I just don't know the answer to it.
And whether, we'd be interested in knowing, maybe you could answer this for the record, of what the funding requirements for that would be to achieve the goals you talked about. Because you referenced ARPA-E in your initial statement, so that's
I
why I
did.
asked about it. Okay. You expressed some interest in amending or a different approach to 1744, the Storage Act, with respect to PURPA. Does the administration have a view on what we should do with PURPA? Give me the open-ended opportunity to address it without reference to a particular
The
bill.
administration?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of a formal policy on PURPA of the administration, but I can check. I will say that, FERC, which is an agency within DOE, has issued some modernization proposals on PURPA on issues within its jurisdiction.
Do you have an opinion on those, whether those are good improvements?
Well, I think like most members in the congressional branch, that it's always a good idea to modernize acts that might have been passed at a time.
Sure.
So, I mean, PURPA was passed in 1978. I think it would be reasonable for whether you're an agency or you're, a member of Congress to consider updating PURPA. Today's PURPA provisions, though, is 111D. It's separate from the mandatory purchase obligations,
Right.
That FERC is looking at.
And do you, just while we have you, do you have any independent thoughts while you're here about what we should do with PURPA in general?
I think it's important to modernize it. I think you can look at it.
Sure, of course, we'd all agree on modernizing it.
Yeah.
But do you have specific steps you'd like us to see within this term of modernization?
Well, and these are my opinions only, based on probably my prior role, but
That's good.
when I was actually looking in an opposite direction at the witness. And that would be, I think that it's fair that you look at avoided cost, definition on states, because, today our electricity markets have changed considerably. And back in 1978, we had vertically integrated utilities, we had vertical markets, we had essentially natural monopolies in place, and all of that has changed. We also have quite a few other incentives for the building of renewables. I do think you ought to look at definition, and we did this in 2005. We tried to modernize it as well. Back then, we looked at the cogen units, and I think it's fair to look at the small, the small power production facilities as well.
Thanks. My time's expired. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And maybe you might want to look at 111D as well.
His time has expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Latta for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Undersecretary, thanks very much for being with us today. Greatly appreciate your testimony. Given your position and experience, I know that you have worked with the private sector to advance new technologies and solutions that would improve energy efficiency. Would you offer your perspective on the Energy Star program and how important it has been to driving innovation in energy efficiency?
Well, thank you for that question. You can go back to the early days of the efficiency program and other efforts, through 2005 on the Energy Star program. This was a voluntary program where the department would establish standards and together with EPA, would essentially market appliances that would meet certain, energy efficiency standards. I think that generally it has worked well with respect to the marketing of it. Regarding expertise within each department, I think we might, want to look at that and see if, in fact, we can make any improvements there. But by all measures, the Energy Star program is a good indication to consumers right away that it meets certain standards, and that they can rest assured knowing that the appliance that they purchase, will have gone through a fairly rigorous process.
Since there have been efforts to establish building codes to reduce emissions, could you talk about the instances of buildings utilizing Energy Star certified technologies for emissions reduction?
Well, I think what you see is, on Energy Star, on buildings, it's typically buildings, buildings and the builders of buildings like to include these Energy Star appliances in all buildings. It's I know I just recently had a chance to to move closer to the department, and it was a brand new building, and throughout the entire building was all Energy Star products, and in fact it was a selling point. Together with the building codes that they meet today, it was not a LEED building. There are times when we do put the leading environmental and engineering design on there. That's another way that buildings can to inform the public that they've made investments, to meet performance standards and energy efficiency standards in the building. And the department supports all these things. But I think it's working well. I think it's good to inform the consumers, and anything that I think we can do to build on it would be positive. Again, I will say that I think it's fair to look at the relationship between DOE and EPA as we go forward.
All right, thank you. On the subject of storage, I've heard from electric utilities and rural cooperatives, and just by coincidence, I have the largest number of rural co-ops in the state of Ohio and my district, about the need for additional research and development into storage technologies. At the same time, since my district is home to 60,000 manufacturing jobs, I understand the need for reliable baseload capacity to meet these industrial needs. Would you discuss what DOE is doing to foster storage technologies while also keeping in mind the great demand for baseload capacity?
No, I appreciate the question, and in my opening remarks, I did go into great detail about what we're doing in the energy storage. It's important that it's a comprehensive approach, and we need to keep in mind that it includes just more than batteries, and we need to keep in mind that stationary storage battery would be different from transportation batteries. So now, while we have made great advances in transportation batteries, when we look at grid scale storage, it might be different technologies. We also need to look at the critical minerals and materials that go into these batteries today. Today we're overly dependent on China and other countries for some of the critical minerals and materials that go into these batteries. So our effort is to try to look at new materials that can go into these batteries. Storage, as I had mentioned, is indeed truly, quote, the holy grail, if you will, of really improving and integrating our grid of tomorrow. And that's going to be very flexible. It's going to include a lot of renewables. We're going to be driving down emissions. Indeed, EIA released its outlook the other day. And for 2020, all new electricity generation, with the exception of the Vogtle plant in Georgia, which is a nuclear facility using the AP1000, all new generation in the United States will be renewables and natural gas, both for 2020 and 2021. In 2020, 75% of the new generation will be renewables, 25% will be natural gas, and in 2021, it's expected to be about 50-50. So to accommodate that, battery storage will be important because it helps to be able to bring in these new sources of energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Doyle is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Rush and Ranking Member Upton, for holding this hearing. The bills we're discussing today are important because reducing our energy consumption and building out new energy systems will be critical to reaching our goal of becoming a net zero carbon emitter. Energy efficiency is a really effective tool because it not only reduces the need for more energy infrastructure, reduces emissions, and provides thousands of jobs, but it lowers energy bills, leaving consumers with more money in their pockets. In fact, according to the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, by expanding energy efficiency programs through efforts such as improving industrial efficiency, retrofitting buildings, and improving appliance standards, energy efficiency has the potential to cut U.S. energy use and greenhouse gas emissions by 50% while delivering energy savings worth more than $700 billion by 2050. Energy storage is also a key component to a cleaner energy future because it is multidimensional resource that's applications are almost limitless. Importantly, it has the ability to truly unlock the full potential of renewables by smoothing out the intermittency of the energy they produce. We have already seen that by making renewables function more like baseload power, renewables plus storage are already able to replace some fossil fuel power plants. But storage is not just limited to helping renewables. It's also a key component of making the grid more resilient. It can be used in a microgrid to ensure that vital services have power during a disaster, and it can help delay or negate costly upgrades of transmission infrastructure by storing locally produced energy near customers. It's clear to me that we must expand the use of energy storage and energy efficiency to reach our climate goals and to continue reducing consumer bills while growing a clean energy workforce. Mr. Secretary, in your written testimony, you said that the Department is committed to creating and sustaining American global leadership in energy storage through the Energy Storage Grand Challenge. What is the Grand Challenge currently doing to advance energy storage research and development?
Well, thank you, Congressman Doyle, for the question. And as I had outlined, in my opening remarks, we see it includes many of the things that you mentioned in your statement. It's a comprehensive approach that will look at all types of different storage. It's not limited to one type or the other. It's hybrid systems. It's to make sure that the systems can discharge electricity on demand over time. It's just not simply a battery.
But I understand what the goals of the program are, but what are you currently doing in this program, this Grand Challenge? What's currently going on that's advancing research and development?
Right. So it's cross-cutting. So we use a lot of different offices within the department. We include EERE, as you had mentioned, Office of Electricity, that covers the grid. It includes offices of science, batteries, pump storage, controllable loads, distributed energy resource management, microgrids,
But is there any projects or programs? I mean, it's a grand challenge to advance, the R&D. Is there anything going on right now?
Right, yes. So we have the Advanced Storage Initiative. We have a program that's in Colorado right now that has an integrated grid. It's over at NREL, which is our National Renewable Energy Laboratory. This is an integrated grid in real time. So it has the wires, it has component parts in real operation. We also have announced at PNNL. Now this is in Washington. At our lab, we have the Grid Storage Launchpad. This too will involve setting up the technologies that will serve as storage in real time.
Okay,
We're building a facility out there.
I want to ask you a couple more questions, and I see my time is going down. One of the challenges we have with energy storage is that most of the commercial batteries can't provide energy for more than 4 hours. I'm curious, what is the department doing to advance research on longer-term storage solutions?
Yeah, that's a key factor. Our program office in fossil energy in particular and elsewhere, we are driving to expand the time, the time that it takes to store, fast charge, the length of time that you can keep a charge, the dispatchability, over time, the number of times that you can call on it to discharge. It has to act like base load.
Yeah.
All right? So you have to have it when you need it, but it has to be able to discharge it. And it has to do it repetitively, on demand. These are enormous challenges.
I see my time has expired.
But,
Thank
but
you.
the key is that there's a difference between the stationary storage technologies and the transportation storage technologies. So if you have a battery in a car, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can have a battery that can withstand those rigors that we need to address.
Thank you.
Thank the chair now recognizes Ms. McMorris Rogers for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Storage and efficiency are two crucial components to any sustainable energy strategy. Eastern Washington is on the cutting edge in innovating to help America lead on both fronts. For instance, hydropower pumped storage is a great solution for increasing grid flexibility with the ability to store and produce electricity when demand is high. On energy efficiency, Avista in Spokane, Washington is currently working with a group of companies on a first-of-its-kind energy sharing, Eco District. It's about 5 blocks in Spokane, creating one of the most sustainable building complexes in the world. This Eco District will be centered on zero emission, zero carbon, catalyst building, and a central clean energy plant that will enable the district to operate in its own self-contained green grid using thousands of state-of-the-art IoT sensor devices, solar panels, thermal and battery storage, and sustainable building materials like cross-laminated timber. These types of innovative projects are going to help America lead the world in a clean energy future, and I'm proud that much of this innovation is happening in Eastern Washington. I'm interested in learning today how the federal government can complement what the private sector is already doing. So the question is, the Pacific Northwest National Lab, PNNL, just mentioned, coordinates much of the energy storage work that DOE performs on batteries, specifically large-scale batteries for the grid, and relatively small batteries for electric vehicles. As they say, better batteries drive better technology. Can you talk about the work being done at PNNL on materials, manufacturing, and the design of batteries?
Well, thank you for the question. And indeed, we have, after much deliberation, we chose to site the grid storage launchpad at PNNL in part because of many of its expertise. Our job is to help educate folks as to what goes on at these labs, because a lot of our labs, were created for reasons that we couldn't go into initially, but now it's time to educate the population. PNNL is a great example. It's a chemistry lab, and it's a cybersecurity lab, among other of its many things that its expertise. And the importance of chemistry in these batteries is very important, grid scale. So we chose PNNL. We're making investments there. What we hope to do is not only to find new chemistries and new materials necessary, to be the world leader on this, but we also want to make sure that the complexities in integrating in the grid are also met. And so that's what we hope to do there. We have to factor in cybersecurity. It was another great location there because, as you know, PNNL has been a leader in developing some of the diagnostics that, frankly, our intelligence communities are using to help make sure that our energy systems are secure and safe. Combined with the research that we're doing there, we will then develop the public-private partnerships because we do think that that's the best way to be able to drive these technologies out so that utilities, companies, communities can take what we're developing there and help develop these kinds of microgrids, the integrated microgrids, et cetera, that you described. We also have several of those around the country where DOE has helped support to try to bring communities together and all the stakeholders together to describe what you just described, the many different ways to go about to be able to get an integrated modern grid using right now the best technologies that we have. But we need to do better. And that's what the department should be doing that, right? I mean, private industry is going to be doing a lot. You can see announcements every day that customers want many of them want 100% renewable. Many utilities are looking at ways to bring in battery storage and storage on their systems. In the Pacific Northwest, we've had energy storage for years. We still do. It's
Yes.
great. It's pumped
Natural.
storage, right? It works
Yes.
well, complements renewables. It's great. Not all places in America have that. So
There's lots of potential, though.
there's plenty of
The largest
potential.
natural battery is behind a lot of dams across the country. PNNL, I will have one last question. PNNL estimates the energy storage market could be more than $3 billion by 2022. What is DOE doing to help America stay on the forefront and customers reap the benefits?
Right. So the theme here, when you look at what the department can do with our labs, breakthrough technologies really do not occur in the labs as you would have, in the old days where it's experiment after experiment after experiment, and you learn through the scientific method then. Today, it's modeling, It's modeling and remodeling, and it's development of new materials. I mean, just think about that for a minute. These are materials that do not exist, that through the modeling you're going to create, and when you layer over the artificial intelligence so that we can look at all the data that we're getting, we're going to be able to drive to get to those new materials that are going to be necessary so that they can withstand the demands that we're going to put on them to have the modern grid of the future.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Rush. Mr. Secretary, as far as I can see, DOE hasn't completed a single new or revised appliance standard developed during the Trump administration. Rather, it's missed one legal deadline after another for updating standards. Chairman Rush touched on this issue, but I wanted to get into a bit more detail. And it's not the first time I've asked you about these missed statutory deadlines. In January 2018, you testified before this committee and gave, I quote, full-throated support to meeting statutory deadlines. You said, and I quote, the department is committed to following the law, to having these standards in place according to the deadlines that are set in statute. You specifically gave the committee assurances that DOE wouldn't slow walk or stall efficiency rules. Now, from your time in this committee, I think you're a person who doesn't give his word lightly, and I think you meant what you said. But 2 years have passed since those statements, and the department has only fallen further behind, and the number of missed deadlines has only increased. In January 2018, DOE had missed 8 statutory deadlines for new standards. The total missed deadline count now stands at 21, and the department has yet to complete a single updated standard. So let me ask you, Mr. Secretary, you just told Chairman Rush that DOE has published 7 final rules in the last year. How many of these 7 final rules were published as a result of a court order only after DOE held the rules for 3 years of the 7?
Well, thank you for the question. I'm not sure I can answer that question precisely, so allow me to get with the, with my.
All right,
department
I mean,
to find out.
please get back to us. My understanding is it's about 4. And how many of these?
What's over half?
Well, 4 that were only by court order is what I'm pointing out. But again, you have to get back to me. I don't want to answer the question. I want you to answer it. How many of these 7 final rules related to light bulbs? Can you answer that?
Again, I'll have to get
All right.
back. You're talking about a final rule. I'll have to get back to you.
Okay. So, has the DOE issued any final rules fully developed under this administration that advance efficiency? In other words, that were actually developed by the Trump administration? Have there been any that were fully developed under the Trump administration that advance efficiency? Yes or no?
Well, again, these are rules. You inherit a process. These are not. Each administration doesn't come in and start from scratch.
Well, I understand, but I think
So-
the answer you don't want to give me, but I think it's no. Because
No, but the answer I want to give you is that in the last year, you're quoting 2018 numbers. I respect that.
But my
But,
point,
but
Mr.
my point
Secretary,
is
look,
that
my-
over the last year, we have been making tremendous progress.
well,
in
I don't
terms of-
agree with that because you can't answer. You say 7 final rules, but it seems like
Well, you're asking me very specific questions, and I'm
I mean,
happy
you
to
can't
get-
tell me whether or not you develop. Look, my point is, it's very nice to say you have 7 final rules, but if you were forced into them by court order, okay, or if they were actually done to try to make things less efficient, that doesn't count, in my opinion. They had to be final rules that were done by this administration because they were actually trying to advance efficiency, and it seems to me there aren't any in that
Well,
category.
Let me
unless you can
respond.
give me one.
Let me respond to that. One thing that we have proposed is the process rule, because when you look at
I
energy efficiency
understand. Look, it's
standards.
3 years. I only have a minute and a half.
Just allow
yet.
me to answer.
I just wanted to know if there was anything that you developed that would actually advance efficiency that you did on your own without the court telling you had to do it, and you can't answer it. So I think the answer is no, or you're certainly hinting that there's nothing like that. I just want to see action from the department to update and finalize efficiency standards that will actually save consumers money and that you're actually doing, as opposed to just, responding to some court order. That's all I'm asking for. and not things that are making things worse and not advancing efficiency, but are making things less efficient. That's where it seems to be going. In fact, many times, the department or the president almost imply that they don't want to do things that advance efficiency. They want to make things less efficient. And to be perfectly honest, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, we're all in favor of energy efficiency. This isn't a partisan issue. But unless you can point out some case where you're actually doing this because you want to, I have doubts about it. Go ahead. You got.
Well, let me just give me
Sure,
a couple of
20
seconds to
seconds.
respond.
Sure.
Because, I stand by the fact that we are absolutely committed to try to meet these statutory deadlines. Now, interestingly, when you get there, the first report you get is a category of status on appliance standards. And there is a category that says failure to meet statutory deadlines. We inherited that category. That is a category. In fact, I asked my general counsel, is this a new category? He says, no, this has been in existence
Okay.
for some
Mr.
time.
Chairman,
Just
if you
please
would-
allow me to finish. One thing that we did is the process rule. So we have all these appliance standards, and they're all statutory. They're not prioritized by statute, right? They're all treated equally.
No.
But when you look at how much time the department has to implement all these appliance standards,
But these
what
are
you
just
find-
excuses,
just
Mr.
allow me to
Chairman.
finish, please.
But you're not answering the question.
But just
The
let me tell
question
you
is,
what
are
we're
you
doing.
actually doing anything to promote efficiency?
Well,
and you're
so-
giving me all bureaucratic answers about process, but whatever.
That's a
It's
compliment
hopeless,
from you.
Mr. Chairman.
So, what we have discovered is that we are spending 40% of our time on efficiency standards that will essentially save only 4% energy off of a baseline. 40% of our time is chasing 4% on energy savings, okay? 60% of our time is on energy efficiency standards that results in 96% efficiency gains. So all we're saying is let us prioritize those and let us go forward on that.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes Mr. Flores for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Undersecretary Menzies, thank you for being here today. You were talking in the last set of responses about new materials and new technologies for scale storage. One of the things I'm very concerned about is the environmental impact and the impact of certain societies on lithium-ion batteries. Why don't you talk a little bit about the greatest challenges to advancing grid scale storage that's both environmentally friendly and doesn't cause slave labor, human trafficking issues in other countries?
Thank you for the question. Two important points on that. One on the recycling of lithium, for example, lithium batteries. So today we recycle, many of you remember the lead-acid batteries. I grew up with lead-acid batteries. Recycling was an issue. Today we recycle almost 100% of lead-acid batteries. We recycle much less, maybe 5 to 10% of lithium batteries today. So we put in place a battery recycling beyond lithium. We want to recycle that. We want to reuse the lithium. We want to reclaim the lithium. And so that's just good housekeeping.
But beyond lithium, I mean, lithium still has environmental challenges that are huge. So where do we go beyond lithium? What is it that you use to get to the next battery storage
Well, that's our
solution?
breakthrough technology efforts. So we have the Beyond Lithium program, and that's in the research and development that I've been talking about before. That looks at new chemicals, new technologies, solid state, any number of different ways. And many of our labs are investigating these new materials. I want to say that with respect to lithium, this goes to the earlier point, right? While we have lithium available, we have to find ways that we can, process it here in the United States so that we can lessen our reliance on other countries that provide us the critical minerals. So that's a hallmark of what we do. And in fact, we have an initiative at the department on critical minerals.
Okay. Let's move to a different subject. As we know, our electricity grid has been probed by bad actors overseas and maybe a few domestically as well. And that's our current legacy system, transmission, generation, distribution, so forth. if we incorporate a new technology, and that is grid scale storage, it seems to me like we ought to be building cybersecurity mitigation and defense into that from the outset. How's the DOE proposing to do that?
Well, what we did when we got over there, Secretary Perry and Undersecretary Brouillette, Deputy Secretary Brouillette, we set up an Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. It goes by CSER. We have put the resources in to address the threats that you mentioned.
Okay. Moving to the next step, one of the bills we're looking at is the Storage Act. Is there any additional language that ought to be included to address cybersecurity?
Right. We talked about that earlier. Indeed, I think that it would be very helpful that if we could put some provisions in there on cybersecurity for several reasons. One, it shows the congressional intent to make sure that we put resources there. It sends the message to our appropriators. And so it certainly helps because we have limited resources there.
In that regard, one of the things we've noticed over in the telecommunications space is that we have bad actors like Huawei that have known security vulnerabilities for anybody that uses Huawei equipment. There may be challenges from Chinese supply chains, or the impact of Chinese supply chains on components for our electrical grid, including storage. What should we be doing about that?
Excellent question. And we're doing, what we can. In addition to creating, the CSER office, what we're working on is certainly working with our intel communities, and I can't get into it in a public setting, but we're identifying these actors. We're identifying the potential threats. We're also working with the supply chain providers to make sure that those that make the new devices that we're putting on our grid, to make them more flexible, more modern. The sensors, the phasers, the industrial operating systems that we need, to make it more flexible and to modernize it, we need to make sure that they are protected as well.
Okay.
So we're working with our labs, we're working with industry, we're working with the intel communities to ensure that we can identify the makers of these systems that we use, and we are making sure that they are as secure as they can in the new cyber world.
Okay, thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. McNerney is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I thank the chairman, and I thank you, Mr. Undersecretary, for your service and for your testimony this morning. I'm going to stray a little bit from the topic of energy storage to this topic of storage of nuclear waste, if you don't mind too much. I'm the lead sponsor of H.R. 2699, the Nuclear Waste Policy Amendment Act of 2019, along with my good friend and colleague, Mr. Shimkus. This bipartisan bill came out of committee on a voice vote, highlighting the desire of our members to break the logjam and address the pressing issue of nuclear waste storage. In a reversal from previous budgets proposed by the Trump administration, the recently released fiscal year 21 request omits any money for the licensing of the stalled Yucca Mountain Nuclear Waste Repository. Instead, the president has been quoted as saying that his administration will be, quote, exploring innovative approaches for long-term storage of nuclear waste. Can you, Mr. Secretary, Undersecretary, elaborate on what types of innovative approaches are under consideration?
Thank you for the question. Indeed, the president recognized the importance of us doing something with the nuclear waste that we have stored across our country at the nuclear facilities. He also recognizes that the law of the land is indeed permanent repository at Yucca Mountain. He is, as everybody that cares about this issue, frustrated in the fact that still we have not been able to get the resources or the authorization that we need to be able to license Yucca. So what he has called on is going to be an interagency process, with states, with the stakeholders, so that we can get together and we can try to figure out a way forward on this. It's just, it's been, as you expressed, the urgency to address this. It's costing us $2 million a day, as we continue to delay the permanent storage. And we're trying to find a path forward to build on some of the ideas, but that's the goal here.
Well, how does the administration envision getting the approval of the states that would be involved in storage?
It will be a process, and that's important. What we're trying to do is to put together a process that will give us a path to permanent storage at Yucca. So it will be a difficult way to go, but rather than just simply pointing a finger at one another or at Congress or at other agencies of not going, we're going to get everybody
Well,
together.
I see your frustration, but I did ask what innovative approaches are being considered, and I haven't heard anything about that yet.
Well, it's going to be some of the things that you have in your bill, for example. I mean, it's interim, potentially, the interim storage, whether it's private, whether it's public, the location, you know, who might help pay for some of the cost. It's going to be a comprehensive view of that, so that ultimately we can find the ways to permanent repository. Unless Congress decides to change the law and name another place for a permanent repository than Yucca, and Congress can do that. That's the law. We got to figure out how to get there.
Well, we're going to have to cooperate to get something done, that's for sure. The current law only allows you to do one thing with regard to addressing the issue of nuclear waste, as you just mentioned. What do you think legislation would be necessary to change that?
Right. Well, you're, again, and the administration hasn't taken a position, please, but, you know, the Shimkus bill, your bill on interim storage, Congress needs to direct us to focus on interim storage. Otherwise, right now, the permanent storage is the repository at Yucca Mountain.
Well, the
So
interim...
Congress can actually help.
Thank you for giving us that power. The interim
You
storage...
have power. We hope that you use it to help us.
The interim storage program would be subject to the approval of the states under consideration or Indian
In your
tribal land in our bill.
Yeah, right.
So considering the president stated that in his fiscal year 21 budget requests support for, quote, the implementation of a robust interim storage plan, do you envision the DOE increasing research into storage programs, into different innovative programs?
Well, I hope it complements the process that we've established to go through. So I'd like to work with you and your staff to make sure that our process complements, you know, perhaps the goals in your bill. I think that's
I mean, there are different approaches that are being recommended, so we need research into deciding if those are viable or not.
we have definitely learned that lesson with Yucca. You're going to need the science, you're going to need the research, you're going to need everything it takes to address this very difficult issue.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walden, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the Undersecretary for being here. H.R. 1744 calls for making changes to PURPA, requiring that state electricity regulators must consider investments in energy storage when doing resource planning. I've been a leading advocate on this committee and in Congress for modernizing PURPA. As you may know, I'm sure, late last year, FERC announced plans to update regulations related to PURPA. Many of those changes in their regulatory reform mirrored changes in PURPA that I have called for in my bill, H.R. 1502, the PURPA Modernization Act. Things like stopping the gaming, implementing innovation, and the like, those things are important. The changes, these regulatory revisions, are long overdue. I think you identified that already. Significantly long overdue. PURPA worked. It moved us forward in looking at means by which we could have renewables and other energy issues dealt with. These changes should provide state regulatory authorities much-needed flexibility to ensure that consumers continue to benefit from lower energy prices, and specifically that results from shale innovation and the revolution there. Let me ask you, Mr. Secretary, does H.R. 1744, the Storage Act, and we've been talking about storage here, but does it address any of the real reforms necessary to reflect today's new technologies, abundance of competitively priced energy supplies, or, last but not least, the needs of consumers?
Well, as we discussed, and thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for your leadership on the PURPA issues. You know, it's sort of an arcane law in many respects, but your leadership on this and your willingness to get down and look at some of the...
Arcane is an understatement at this point in time.
Regarding the bill before us, it clearly amends 111D. And so in the PURPA world, we know that's separate from a lot of what FERC is working on. FERC is sort of working on the mandatory purchase obligations, 210M, I think it is. And, you know, we tried to address a lot of that in '05 on the cogen units. Today, small power production facilities may be a problem, but FERC is looking at that. Today's bill is 111D, and 111D really doesn't go to any of the things that you had mentioned with respect to needing to reform PURPA. This bill adds to, I think we're up to over 20 of the national standards where it looks at storage, and it puts the burden on states to open up a docketed proceeding, have stakeholders come in, get comments, and within each state, and each state is different, right? Some states are in PJM, some states are, you know, in regulated markets, some are in bid-based markets. Each state is potentially unique in coming into compliance on this 111D. As I had mentioned, this is not a small undertaking. States do take the 111D seriously because it's a federal mandate to do it, and if you have them do it within a certain time period, this is going to take quite a bit of resources. And as I had mentioned earlier, today our energy system has gotten to be that many stakeholders operate in multiple states. And so today's bill, and again, the administration is not taking a position pro or against, but just in my own personal experience, you have to cover a lot of states all dealing with this, and just keep in mind that it just takes resources from the states as well as the individuals. However, it does set forth a national standard. And in the absence of a mandate, a 111D PURPA, you know, does serve a purpose. So after the time period, we can get all the data together and we can see some states will choose to go forward, some states will not.
Well, I think the benefit of today, though, here in Congress is that this has support from members of both sides of the aisle in doing something, in modernizing and dealing with storage, et cetera. Can a case be made that it might be harder to fully measure the benefits of storage technology if PURPA is not modernized from its current outdated regulations?
Well, I know PURPA needs to be updated. Whether there's I would think, that's an interesting question. I guess.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is, with the benefit of having support from both sides of the aisle in dealing with PURPA, we'd love to have the administration jump in with us and push as hard as possible to move to the modernization, to deal with the storage issues as well. I see my time is over, but I did want to get that point in, Mr. Chairman.
We look forward to working with the committee.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Kennedy for 5 minutes.
Sir, thanks for being here. Thanks for your testimony, Chair, and thank you for having this important hearing. Mr. Secretary, as a part of the 2021 budget request released by the Trump administration on Monday, DOE would set aside $97 million for the Energy Storage Grand Challenge Program and $40 million for the Grid Storage Launchpad. Can you discuss in a little bit of detail the specific goals that DOE would like to achieve with the Grand Challenge?
Right, and thank you for the question, and I've articulated this. This is going to be a comprehensive approach using many of the offices within the department, so it's both comprehensive in technology and in use. It's also comprehensive in us drawing on all the expertise within the department. So we will include the applied offices, but we'll also go to the Office of Science, where we get their best work there. We had mentioned ARPA-E before. We have ARPA-E and some of their projects. And so we're pulling together all of the efforts across the department and its labs to be able to focus on pulling together all the expertise so that we can help design not only the products, but the way that they would be applied. And then we also have set up the Office of Artificial Intelligence Technology Office. And so to the extent that we create data as a result of this, we'll be able to use that to further make advancements on materials and applications.
And thank you. Can you explain if the goals of the grid storage launchpad have changed at all since it was first proposed in 2020?
Our goals?
Yeah, have the goals changed since 2020 to today?
We have added on the initial goals. So initially, it was a sort of a physical location to where we were actually going to build things and put in place, which is a key part. But we've now expanded it. It's important to know that we've expanded it to bring in basic R&D to help develop new products, materials, et cetera, that can be used in it to help further the expansion of the actual grid storage. So together with modeling, new materials, we'll be able to add to what we're doing.
And you mentioned ARPA-E. Is that, do you think they have something to add in the development of those two programs as well?
Sure. So it's a cross-cutting. So we draw on all of the offices that are involved in storage in any way. So ARPA-E tends to be applied side, but it's tremendous results, there could be used in further development of basic R&D.
So, thank you. Both the programs, as I understand it, Mr. Secretary, seek to entice innovation in storage technologies, which is great. You can probably see where this is going. Once again, DOE is proposing to eliminate the office of ARPA-E, which is arguably the office most poised to make significant advances on breakthrough energy technology, especially on the storage front. And you just described some of the results there as tremendous. So if ARPA-E has done, or has been important on such research, development, and innovation, why does DOE continue to call for its elimination?
Well, thanks for the question. ARPA-E focuses more on applied science, applied technologies. That is that it is no longer basic R&D, right? It's you can force it out to commercialize it, okay? And we think that public-private partnerships, can do that. For the role of the government, it's important that the government spend its limited resources, we only have so much resources, on basic R&D, because this is what the private sector is not doing. The energy sector is so competitive today that gone are the days when companies can have the luxury of having like Bell Labs, right, and have their own huge R&D. I mean, some companies do, but generally the times have changed. The government plays the role in looking at the technologies that don't exist, the new materials that don't exist, and you can use the taxpayer resources to really drive that. ARPA-E is set up to take what has been developed and to push it out commercially, okay? And to complement ARPA-E on that is we've established the Office of Technology Transfer. Okay, so and that's where we're setting up these public-private partnerships.
Understood, and I guess the only thing I'd highlight, and we can move on, but given that you've described the success as tremendous, given the fact that you've said that there is an important role for it to play, I do think it is interesting that the administration continues to call for the elimination of the office. That's it.
Right, but we do have the obligation to make sure that appropriated monies are spent, and so we have that commitment. So we do follow the law over there. This is the president's proposal, and like I said, the reason why the president's proposal makes sense is to distinguish the important role of the government to really focus on basic R&D. That's where taxpayer dollars, in our view, should really be spent.
Fair enough, sir. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Duncan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I want to align myself with Mr. McNerney's comments about Yucca Mountain. I think he's spot on. But as a fiscal conservative, I don't see the nation spending more money for an interim storage site when we've already spent so much ratepayer money and tax dollars on Yucca Mountain to get it to the point that it was. that's throwing good money after bad. We have interim storage right now, and that's currently where the nuclear waste is sitting. That's on site at the commercial reactors around the country, 38 states and 122 sites. The permanent solution, national problem is Yucca Mountain. We need to get behind the Nuclear Waste Policy Amendments Act. We need to get Yucca Mountain back on track, and I appreciated your comments there. Shifting gears to the topic of the hearing today, you know, there are direct costs to the consumer for more stringent building codes. And Mr. McIntyre, the president of the National Association of Home Builders, who's going to testify, I think, in a little while, but he testified in front of this subcommittee last September, that each $1,000 of regulatory cost displaces about 127,000 households from the market. We all support saving energy, but there is a natural incentive to do so because it saves money. But in your opinion, what role should the federal government play in energy-efficient efforts?
Well, we have a role to play in that, as you just heard me talk about, doing basic R&D to make sure that if, you know, we can make new materials and that the public-private partnerships can take it out and implement it. One thing that this administration stands for, and I think that it's evident in the results of the economy today, is that, you know, we have stood for deregulation. Okay, we have found that if you lessen the regulations on people, they will be creative and innovative, and they'll be able to do the things that their consumers need, and they'll be able to do it in the most efficient manner. We reformed the tax code, and you can see the evidence again in the economy today. We believe that without the mandates, and you provide incentives for people, that is the way to encourage behavior. And it's the same thing, whether it's building codes or anything else, that usually gets the best results. And we see that. We're leading the world in energy, in greenhouse gas emissions. You know, not because it's been mandated on it, it's because we're making choices that result in that.
Yeah, I think given the choice, a consumer is going to pick the most energy-efficient appliances readily available, as long as there's not a huge price point difference. But when we see policies like what Berkeley County, California has done with banning natural gas, so consumer doesn't have a choice in choosing a very efficient natural gas appliance, now they're forced into an electrical appliance that may not be as efficient, but it's based on the desire to end the fossil fuel usage. So shouldn't builders and consumers be able to choose if natural gas appliances makes more economical sense depending on where they live instead of a one-size-fits-all approach of stretch codes in H.R. 3962? Wouldn't you agree with that?
I would. Mm-hmm.
You've answered a lot of questions. I'm toward the end here. Let me just finish with this. I want to revert back to Yucca Mountain for just a second and remind members of this committee and remind people watching this hearing that the Nuclear Waste Policy Act that set up Yucca Mountain imposed a fee on ratepayers in this country for the construction and operation of Yucca Mountain. Ratepayers, as a portion of the utility bill, pennies at a time, but the consumer didn't have any choice of whether they wanted to pay that or not. As small as South Carolina is, South Carolina ratepayers have paid upwards on $3 billion for Yucca Mountain. That's just in South Carolina. 38 other states, ratepayers paid that as well. That's on top of the tax dollars that we're paying now every year. So South Carolina has got nothing for our $3 billion investment. Money that was confiscated in every utility bill that South Carolinian ratepayers paid for a long period of time. It's time to get the Yucca Mountain back on track, and with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Berrigan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Undersecretary, the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, did it spend all of the money that Congress allocated last year?
Oh, thank you for asking me that question. I have some good news.
It's a yes or no. Did they or no? Did they spend all the money that Congress allocated
For fiscal year
for last year?
19,
Correct.
right? So for fiscal year 19, we have completed selections on all but one of the FOAs, and we have been consistent or ahead of schedule when compared to the past 5 years.
So have you guys spent all the money? Yes or no? Or you, other than this one little
spending-
program you're telling me about?
Yeah, we have a good record on that. I can get you the specific numbers, but yeah.
So there's an article that says a third of the budget was unspent. Is that not accurate?
So this is going to get into a little arcaneness here on, so monies, we issue FOAs, all right, and then we have.
Okay, so let me ask you a simple question. Are you spending 100% of the money that Congress is allocating on the programs for energy efficiency?
Yeah, so we are
Yes?
complying with the law, and we are spending it as rapidly as we can.
Okay.
There are some of these.
So you haven't
There are
yet,
some of these obligated but unspent monies that will be spent, but when you just do the bookkeeping, you will see that there's a carryover amount, but they're obligated and they will be spent over the life of the project. So
Okay.
it's not like you spend all your money in 1 year. It's physically impossible because these are very technical challenges and they're
Okay,
negotiated.
Mr.
and we
Undersecretary, I
expect it to
reclaim my
go over
time.
the
I have
years.
another question I want to get to.
Okay.
I'm asking you because I read an article that indicated that the Office of Energy Efficiency canceled $46 million in grants for solar research and development before they could be awarded. Is that true or not true?
No, that's a false statement.
It is a false
It
statement.
is a false statement.
You guys haven't canceled any dollars for solar research and development before they could be awarded.
No, if we reissued a FOA, that's something completely different. The process was not finished. And we reissued the FOA, and the monies went out. So it's a false statement. I'm not sure who read that. I don't know why you
Okay.
would believe everything.
Well, that's why I'm asking you, Mr. Undersecretary, because I want to make sure to get the answers.
Yeah, that's a
and
false statement.
And we'll follow up with you with
Yeah.
that article so that we can make sure to.
Yeah, if that's what
fix
they
that
said,
disparity.
and if that, the context may make it different, but that's
Okay.
false.
Are you aware that on the website for the Energy Department, it says on the Energy Star program's website, it says Energy Star products save American families and businesses $30 billion in 2017. Do you agree with that? Do you agree the Energy Star program saved American families some $30 billion in 2017?
I don't dispute that figure, although I don't know what the exact figure is.
Okay. And according to your department, nearly 600,000 Americans are employed in manufacturing or installing Energy Star certified appliances. Do you believe that's accurate?
Again, I don't know the specific numbers. I'm not disputing it. I just don't know if the
Okay,
numbers.
what's by your own department? So we'll just say yes.
Well, I just, okay,
So
I guess.
does the Trump administration's proposed budget, have you seen the proposed budget? Let's start there.
I have,
Okay. Do you stand by the Trump budget?
of course.
Okay, good. Just
I'm a
checking.
Trump official.
Well, we've had people come in here that don't exactly, on point, and they may vary a little bit differently. So I just wanted to make sure. When you looked at the budget, does the Trump budget eliminate money for the Energy Star program?
It might. I'm not sure I know all the specifics.
Okay, let me
about it. So
tell you that it
then why don't
does.
Why don't you?
It
tell me
does
what you
cut
read.
money for the Energy Star program, and I just don't understand why. Because if the Energy Star program is saving Americans billions of dollars, if it's creating and employing hundreds of thousands of people, it doesn't make sense to me why we would be cutting opportunities to save Americans dollars when it comes to energy efficiency and jobs and energy efficiency. And so maybe
Well,
what
I'll
I'll
tell you
do,
why. I'll tell you why. it
maybe
makes
what I'll do
sense.
is I'll just follow up with you
Yeah, I'm pleased to.
about that. I
Can I
wanted,
just say something positive about this, right? So you hit the nail on the head. In EERE in particular, they have been very good about establishing milestones. And when you see the congressional justification for it across all the offices, whether it's levelized cost of energy, whether it's performance, cost per kilowatt hour. They have been measuring their success going back years, and we've continued that today. And what you see is we have driven down these prices, we have driven down these efficiencies such that it is fair to ask the question, do we need to continue to spend money to drive it down even more? We have historic low natural gas prices. Our prices for renewable are really driven down. I mean, it's hard to complain about it. With limited resources, were you to spend additional monies for breakthrough technologies to maybe get off of photovoltaics, for example. Photovoltaics in a lot of ways is horse and buggy, okay? We have liquid crystalline perovskite that is the solar device of the future, and yet we still seem to be overly focused on driving down the cost of photovoltaics, which really is not the way of the future. The government should be doing that, not so much the private sector, but it's fair to say that the government should be spending money to look at that.
The chair now recognizes Mr. McKinley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this important meeting with it. Mr. Secretary, I want to direct focus back on the issue of the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitive Act, essentially the building code sections. Now, I spent most of my career, probably, I hate admitting it, but like 55 years in the construction business, dealing with building codes. One thing we've learned is in our practice with the firm I used to have, was how to work with the code and how to work in energy efficiency. My former firm was was the first firm in West Virginia to get a LEED certification for a school building, and we're very proud of the fact that we understand energy efficiency. We understand how we can make those changes with it. So when I came to Washington, one of the first things we did was to try to be an extension of what we've already learned, put in practice the things we learned in the private sector to help out other people with that. And we've worked with numbers of Democrats in a bipartisan way, and more recently with Peter Welch. Peter's unfortunately not able to be here today, but we're talking about the McKinley Welch and the Shaheen-Portman legislation that has passed the Senate now twice. So we want to deal with this. We want to get this, but I'm sorry that Peter can't be here on this, but the concern I'm hearing is involving DOE, and I want some assurance from you, if you could, on that, knowing how the codes work and how the modifications would be, that we don't have the DOE steps in here and doesn't use a heavy hand. I understand in our legislation it's not mandatory for states and municipalities to adopt the new code or the changes that are made, but I want to make sure that there's not, I want them to adopt it. So the concern is how heavy. I think you answered part of it a little bit with the gentleman from Michigan, some about being cooperative with it, that you've found how things have worked out. So tell me a little bit about how you're not going to use a heavy hand when it comes to recommending or implementing changes to the National Building Code or the International Building Code. Can you share some of that with
Well,
me?
thank you for the question, and I don't want to give the impression of using a heavy hand. I do look forward to working with experts like you to fully understand the provisions of the Act. In just my only observations were in reading the Act, the part with the building codes. My understanding, that's Chapter 1, right? So it's similar to the Portman bill, in that it comes out and it says that it's voluntary. Okay,
It's voluntary.
and then when you go through it, then you see a series of shalls, which we know are mandatory. And I'm not arguing or complaining one way or the other. I'm just saying that the voluntary program it may be a voluntary program overall, but DOE will have obligations in a voluntary program that seem to say that we will need to develop new standards. Again, I'm just making observations, making sure that's the intent, and that we will have to grade how these states and tribes and others are either implementing or not, and we kind of have to do a grading of them. We also have to make sure that we provide technical assistance, and as long as you know, monies are appropriated for that,
it
that's
goes
fine.
back
But
to the
I want to make
premise
sure
of
we're
Mr.
not
Secretary's-
talking past one another.
Yeah, Mr. Secretary, I want to make sure that the standards that are set, I want municipalities to accept the code. I just want to hear some assurance that the DOE will not be using a heavy hand on this, that they're going to be cooperative, they're going to work together, because what we don't want to have in our housing stock is causing standards to be so that it raises the cost of housing. So therefore, people, when we have an issue of affordability, we're not exacerbating that problem. So as long as I can get some comfort from the DOE that they're going to be more cooperative.
Well, let me give you that assurance, and please do not misinterpret my comments on a legal reading of it in any way.
Okay.
To speak for the experts in our department that has been working with industry to try to, you know, make standards that are affordable to everyone. We do not accomplish anything if, as you say, we're too heavy-handed and we set standards either no one can meet and they're never implemented, or they're too costly and they never are used. So you have my complete assurance, and please do not misinterpret any of my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Tonko for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary, welcome. The Department of Energy deserves a lot of credit over the past decade in supporting the technology developments and cost reductions we have witnessed in energy storage, but there are still big challenges, and I know that Mr. Doyle covered this area a bit when he talked about long-term seasonal storage, but can you give us a sense of what the department is doing in terms of long duration and seasonal storage, and how those technologies will likely be needed to realize very high levels of renewable resources on the grid?
Right, and you know, we have touched on that, right? And we kind of, to start, for example, you can make a distinction between efficient batteries used in transportation. You know, we think it's ubiquitous now in electric vehicles, the lithium ion, for example. But when you go to grid scale, you have to look not only of size, but as we talked about, it's seasonal. It may make a difference on technologies on location, right? So not every battery grid storage that you might make can withstand the harsh environments of New England, the Pacific Northwest, or, you know, the arid Southwest. So these are technical, basic research and development you need in chemistry and materials and in modeling that's going to help us do that. And that's what we're bringing all together. So when we talk about storage, it's just not one size fits all, and it's not the fact that you can just go take a bunch of, you know, lithium-ion batteries and throw them up and expect to have, you know, a resilient and a safe storage system that can make our grid modern and
Or storing
accommodate-
energy in soil, or
Well,
what?
we're looking at all aspects. We're not limited to batteries. We're having a conversation about batteries, but as we talked about earlier, you know, and you might have come in a little bit after that, but I mean, it's pump hydro where we can do it, right? It may be compressed air. It can be all media is what we're looking at.
Okay, and turning to lithium-ion batteries, we know we're going to see a lot more deployed in EVs and on the grid. DOE launched the lithium-ion battery recycling prize to identify innovative solutions for collecting, sorting, storing, and transporting spent and discarded lithium-ion batteries for eventual recycling and materials recovery. These batteries rely upon critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, and nickel. Can developing a domestic industry for recycling and reuse of these materials help reduce our reliance on foreign sources?
Yes, sir. And indeed, that's one of the aims that we had of announcing that challenge. As I had mentioned before, we might recycle maybe 5 to 10 lithium-ion batteries now, and we're overly dependent on other countries to provide us these necessary elements. So we're looking for material changes. So if you go to our labs today and if you go through our offices today, you will see us really trying to develop new materials to take the place of the lithium and the cobalt.
Well, it's my understanding that Europe is currently recovering about 60% of its lithium in the economy, so it can be done. And
Yes.
The U.S. is dreadfully behind that at around 5%.
Yes, sir.
Do you believe additional DOE support can help bolster domestic recycling and recovery of critical minerals?
Well, I do. I mean, it's part of the educational process, right? And just look at the educational process on lead-acid batteries, right? We're almost 100% right now today on the acid batteries. It can be the same thing with lithium. We just need to make the public aware. They'll start treating all the devices, you know, that they have probably more as a recyclable item. And it's important that those that frankly make the product and sell these products, you know, have the obligation. One thing at the department that you should be aware of, you know, we are now calling on all the developers of new materials, whether they're in our labs or in the private sector, that if you make a new material, you should not leave any environmental legacy to our children or grandchildren. Those days should be over. So when we make new materials, it has to be a complete circular economy, if you will. If you make a product, it needs to be recycled and reused.
Okay, and some of these batteries could have a second life.
Correct.
Has DOE looked at how to help encourage reuse of EV batteries for grid applications?
Yes, I mean, that's part of the grid storage challenge, you know, that we have. So we take existing materials and if we can make improvements on them, we can find that we can make greater use, we can recycle them and upcycle them, if you will, to increase their efficacy.
And it's also a priority to ensure that we're avoiding environmental and safety risks
Yes,
from
sir,
disposal.
I did.
Can the recycling of used batteries also help facilitate safer disposal?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's part of our recycling grand challenge.
Well, I appreciate your responses, and with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Griffin for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. It's nice to see you, Mr. Secretary.
Good to see you.
It's my understanding that the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energies Water Power Technologies Office is investing in closed-loop pump hydro storage technologies and designs. Last Congress, my legislation that streamlined the FERC process for these projects with a 2-year permitting goal was enacted into law. What role do you see for pump storage in meeting our grid-scale energy storage needs?
Well, as we mentioned today, it plays a significant role. Right now, it's playing a key role in the Pacific Northwest and in your district as well. Smith Mountain Lake, I believe, and it's been, you know, it's been a great asset to have. Indeed, others, you know.
Just so my constituents don't think I'm lost, Smith Mountain is just outside of my
just
district.
outside.
Yeah,
Okay.
but that's
sorry
okay. A
about
lot of
that.
my constituents go there, and
Yes.
we get power from there.
Well, I think it's on my way to your district.
It is, absolutely.
Smith Mountain Lake, sorry about that.
That's all right.
But again, it's an example
Yes, sir.
of what you're talking about. And I think that we have other opportunities across America. We have a lot of hydro out there to the extent that we can begin to integrate, you know, some of the hydro power. That's a clean, renewable, available resource. The technology is tried and true.
Now, on the closed-loop pump storage that we got some language changed on, because the water comes, it's not native water, it comes from outside, and what we were hoping to do is stimulate some use in the mines of Central Appalachia. We've got the permitting process under control. Are there other challenges that you know of to advancing this pump storage closed-loop technology?
Right. I mean, permitting is always going to be a challenge. You know, it's a hallmark of this administration that we try to streamline, not eliminate, but we
Right.
streamline the process. And so to the extent that we can help with other agencies, you know, we're happy to do so. We provide technical assistance to help in the permitting process and to try to get it done timely.
Now, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, and I know I'm a little off topic from the discussion that's on the marquee today.
It won't be the first question.
That's been
raised
done on,
yet.
yeah. But you and I and a number of other members in a bipartisan group went to Puerto Rico a couple of years ago. One of the things I was struck by, we were in a town up in the mountains, and there was an abandoned hydro project, a smaller project, and it struck me that even if we had that operational, even if it was just going to supply the local hospital or the high school as a shelter with electricity, it was worth having those types of facilities out there. I think we should use Puerto Rico as a testing ground for some microgrids, because I think it could be helpful in other areas like my district in Central Appalachia in times of disaster, but you can't just suddenly say we're going to do it overnight. So what's the Department of Energy doing on microgrids that might be helpful in times of disaster to have something already there and small hydro?
Well, you might be aware that the department has been working with groups in Puerto Rico to help identify areas where you can establish the microgrid, right? And so it's a combination of locations. I'm not sure if one of them actually involves that, but it could very well be. But the concept is a good one, right? You've got available natural resources, you have infrastructure in place, it might need to be modernized, but at the end of the day, you can have an integrated microgrid that can go both ways. So it can help provide necessary power in Puerto Rico to help stabilize the grid, or if the system shuts down, it can continue to provide its electricity to those that are connected to the microgrid.
Right. And certainly with the various disasters we've seen in Puerto Rico, they could use something like that. Now, I don't know if I'm the last questioner or not, but we're getting near the end of your questions. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about today that you've not had an opportunity to address?
Well, thank you very much. No, I do think that there's an opportunity here to have the committee work with your full committee and pass some bills, right? And again, the administration doesn't take a position, but the department stands by, ready to work with the House and their colleagues in the other body, that if they see fit to begin to pass energy legislation, it will be an opportunity for us to bring our technical expertise, and we look forward to working with you throughout the process. Some of us in this room have been through this before. We know it can be done. It's timely. Things need to be modernized. We would look forward to doing that.
Well, you're always good to work with, and even when we might disagree occasionally, you're always glad to get us the facts, and we appreciate that. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you.
Well, the gentleman yields back, and I'm not going to make any commentary. That concludes our first panel. I want to thank you, Mr. Undersecretary, for joining us today to testify on these hearings. And the chair now asks the staff to prepare the witness table that we can begin our second panel. Again, thank you, Mr. Undersecretary, for your testimony.
Well, thank you very much, and I will say that your members continue to ask as hard of questions as they asked when I was chief counsel. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
For the opportunity to be here.
Right.
Do you need to step out for anything, sir?
Will the second panel please join us at the witness table?
Seriously, can't even fit the clock?
No, but we make smooth like I'm doing that. Even whenever we like, what I had to do myself.
Is everyone ready now? All right. We will now hear from our second panel of witnesses, and I want to welcome this panel of witnesses, and I want to thank you for your patience as we concluded the first panel. Our second panel of witnesses include Ms. Kelly Speaks Backman, who's on my right. She's the Chief Executive Officer of the Energy Storage Association. Ms. Julie Haramoto, the Principal of HKS Incorporated, on behalf of the American Institute of Architects. Mr. Arne McIntyre, the President of McIntyre Builders, on behalf of the National Association of Home Builders. Mr. Lowell Unger, the Senior Policy Advisor for the American Council on Energy Efficient Economy. Ms. Jennifer Schaefer, who is the Executive Director of the Federal Performance Contracting Coalition, and Mr. Brian Howard, who's the Legislative Director of the U.S. Green Building Council. Again, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today, and we look forward to your testimony. At this time, the chair will recognize Ms. Speaks Backman for 5 minutes to provide your opening statement.
Chairman Rush, this one. No. I'm not quite sure how to push it on.
What?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Chairman Rush, Ranking Member Upton, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to speak today on the legislation proposed to promote innovation and modernization of the grid with energy storage. ESA is the National Trade Association working toward a more resilient, efficient, sustainable, and affordable electricity grid enabled by energy storage technologies. With 190 member companies, ESA represents a diverse group of stakeholders, including manufacturers, implementers, system operators, including municipal and cooperative utilities, and other services, all involved in deploying energy storage. We represent a broad technology base that includes electrochemical, thermal, mechanical, process, chemical, and pumped hydro storage. Energy storage enables electricity to be supplied from any source to be saved for use later, exactly when, where, and in whatever form it's needed. Essentially, it decouples the element of time from when it's generated and used, enabling a vast amount of capabilities, be it backup power, peak demand reduction, alleviating stressed grid infrastructure, firming variable generation sources like solar and wind, or maintaining optimal function of inflexible generation sources like nuclear. I've provided testimony speaking to the nature of energy storage
the many applications it can provide, some data on the prolific market growth and cost declines, and a few examples of the types of end users. Today, approximately 2,500 megawatts of battery storage are installed or under development in the U.S., with megawatt-scale installations planned or operating in 29 states. Battery storage specifically, their deployments are forecast to triple this year, representing over $3 billion of investment by 2021. These statistics are staggering. For the purpose of today's hearing, though, the remainder of my remarks will focus on the three pieces of legislation under consideration by this committee. First of all, we applaud the subcommittee for considering the Promoting Grid Storage Act, H.R. 2909, which we've endorsed, as have the American Public Power Association and the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. This bill would create a competitive grant program at DOE for state and local governments, utilities, public power authorities, and rural co-ops to incorporate storage into long-term planning and grid operations. We particularly appreciate that in this bill, the local entities would be empowered to identify the modeling support and the locations that will best serve their systems and share the investment responsibility and construct a competitive proposal for cost share. We're pleased to see H.R. 2909 has bipartisan bicameral support. The Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee has incorporated the major provisions of this bill into an amended version of the BEST Act, Senate Bill 1602, which it reported favorably last fall. The House Science, Space, and Technology Committee is also advancing components of the BEST Act falling under its jurisdiction in H.R. 2986. We encourage this subcommittee to advance the Promoting Grid Storage Act in parallel with these efforts. We believe that by creating public-private partnerships, the widest range of private partners can also be eligible to advance those demonstrations. Therefore, ESA asks the subcommittee to ensure that program eligibility as specified in Section 6A2F is available to private sector entities as well, similar to the Senate Energy and the House Science bills. ESA also recommends that the subcommittee harmonize the technology definitions in Section 1, the listed priorities in Section 4, and the listed objectives in Section 6 with those from the BEST Act bills in those committees. The EASE Act, H.R. 4447, would create a new program of technical assistance to rural electric cooperatives to undertake planning for energy storage and microgrid projects. ESA believes the Promoting Grid Storage Act actually may already accomplish the aims of the EASE Act, but we commend the focused assistance to cooperatives that the EASE Act provides. The Storage Act, or H.R. 1744, would amend Section 111D, as you heard in the panel before, of PURPA, to direct states to consider energy storage in utility resources planning for supply purposes. There's been remarkable progress in utility planning for storage over the past several years. In just the past 4 years, utilities in more than 20 states have selected energy storage for their long-term resource plans. We emphasize, though, that energy storage can perform the services of transmission and distribution assets as well as generation assets. It's critical that storage be considered in infrastructure planning, not just supply planning. We welcome the opportunity to discuss how regulations, as proposed in the Storage Act, can complement these programs. And in conclusion, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's a privilege and an honor to sit on a panel with such esteemed colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll ask the witnesses when it's your turn, make sure your microphone's on and pull it close to you so that we can hear you. Ms. Hiramoto, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Rush, Ranking Member Upton, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify about the legislation before you today. Building sector energy use is a deeply important issue to me and my profession. I am a licensed architect with the firm HKS, based in our Dallas headquarters office. I am also a member of the American Institute of Architects, a professional association of 95,000 architects and allied professionals who work to advance our nation's quality of life through design. Since 1857, the AIA has fought to protect the public's health, safety, and welfare. I am also the chair of the AIA's Committee on Environment, COAT. I applaud the House Energy and Commerce Committee for their serious work to consider how the built environment is contributing to our nation's climate crisis, and how it may become part of the solution. The building sector alone accounts for almost 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, GHG. Roughly 11% come from embodied carbon, meaning the greenhouse gas emissions produced by the creation of building materials and construction. Building operations contribute roughly 28%. To get that down to zero, we must end buildings' dependence on fossil fuels. To that end, in 2009, the AIA established the 2030 commitment to help architectural firms reduce energy consumption in all new buildings and retrofits to 70% below the regional average for that building type, and to reduce fossil fuel use to zero by 2030. These goals align with the policy put forth in the Energy Independence and Security Act, EISA, of 2007, which sets targets for federal buildings to decrease overall energy use and to phase out the use of fossil fuels. The AIA was a firm supporter of that bipartisan policy, signed into law by President George W. Bush. I want to thank the lead co-sponsors of H.R. 3962, the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act, Congressman Welch and Congresswoman McKinney, for their work to promote building energy efficiency. By establishing building training and assessment centers, the bill provides beneficial support to architects and other professions in the building industry to learn new energy-efficient design and best practices. It requires the Secretary of Energy to encourage and support the adoption of building codes by states and municipalities. Most importantly, the bill reestablishes the energy efficiency targets of ECPA with an updated baseline year. Despite the positive provisions, the AIA is deeply concerned that the bill also includes the repeal of Section 433, the current policy that requires the phase-out of fossil fuel use in federal buildings. As we have in the past, the AIA strongly opposes this repeal and cannot support the bill with the inclusion of that provision. We urge the committee to strike that provision and move forward with the other important updates in this bill. Energy efficiency and energy sourcing are not a replacement for one another. We must urgently address both. This is a mathematical necessity if this committee is going to achieve its announced goal of a zero-carbon economy by 2050. In our profession, the reduction of energy use and the decision of where energy should come from are two parts of the same conversation. We start with reducing energy demand, then absorption and conservation strategies, and finally, the generation of renewable energy is the last piece to offset the nominal remaining energy demand. Please see my written testimony for more specific examples. Some have argued that the move to entirely renewable energy sources is not yet possible in all places, and therefore the government should back away from this policy. But this misunderstands the way industry responds to market challenges. Large volume and iconic projects must lead the way, as they have the unique ability to capture the public's imagination. The federal government building portfolio under the GSA is both large and iconic. And as the client, the U.S. federal government should demand that it meets its own goal. The GSA has done impressive work in achieving the targets set out in energy use reduction and energy sourcing. Their hardest work should be supported by this Congress and not undermined by repealing Section 433. Finally, I urge the committee to consider America's role as a leader in reducing global reliance on fossil fuels. This is what the climate crisis demands. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. McIntyre, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mic on? Okay. Not sure who
Can
to
you
address.
pull that microphone closer to you also?
Can you hear it?
There you go.
Okay. Not sure who to address. The faces changed up there. But Chairman Rush, Ranking Member Upton, and members of the committee, I am pleased to appear before you today on behalf of the more than 140,000 members of the National Association of Home Builders, and to testify in opposition of Subtitle A of H.R. 3962, the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act of 2019. My name is Arn McIntyre. I'm a home builder from Grand Rapids, Michigan. As a home builder, I deal with energy codes every day, and I understand how different energy efficient features impact the performance of homes in the experience of its residents or of their residents. As longtime leaders in the drive to make new and existing homes more efficient while ensuring housing remains affordable, my fellow builders and I are uniquely positioned to evaluate the impact this legislation will have on the home building, remodeling, and rental housing industry. Earlier versions of energy codes have focused on consumers, helping them reduce their utility bills with affordable improvements to their homes. Subtitle A, however, will dramatically change this focus by giving the Department of Energy a heavy-handed role in the code development process, and allowing it to pay little attention to costs associated with efficiency, costs associated with efficiency improvements, all at the expense of the would-be homeowners. Although DOE currently plays a key role in research and validating energy efficiency technology, the bill will direct it to advocate for or against certain proposals, technologies, classes of products, and essentially pick winners and losers and impose unreasonable and costly requirements. Subtitle A also undermines the ICC code setting process by requiring DOE to set aggressive energy savings targets, and allowing it to submit code change proposals without being required to obtain stakeholder input. It will also significantly limit the ability of states and local governments to adopt cost-effective and local appropriate building codes. The code development process has proven effective at maintaining the balance between advancing energy efficiency and maintaining the safety, durability, and disaster resistance of buildings. The current consensus process has increased the efficiency of new residential buildings by 40% over the last 12 years, and new homes now far outperform existing homes. Instead of focusing on new construction, Congress should target initiatives and programs that foster solutions and offer incentives for upgrading the existing older buildings, which can constitute more than 80% of the U.S. housing stock or building stock. Equally problematic, Subtitle A fails to ensure that the full array of costs and their economic implications are considered when making further energy use reductions. We know how valuable energy savings can be to consumers, but even with these savings, significant upfront investments must be made for these savings to occur. The 2012 edition of the Residential Energy Code had such significant increases over 2009 code that it would take the average American family 13.3 years to recoup the costs through utility savings. In some parts of the country, including areas in Kentucky and Illinois, payback periods were in excess of 17 years. If the efforts to ratchet up the energy code continue, more consumers will end up paying more for the new requirements than they recoup from energy savings. As a result, the overall cost of home ownership will continue to rise and housing affordability will suffer. For every $1,000 increase in the price of a new home, over 158,000 U.S. households will be priced out of qualifying for a mortgage. To partially address this, NHB believes that the SAVE Act, which is encompassed in H.R. 3962, is an essential component. The SAVE Act provides guidance to the Department of Housing and Urban Development to ensure that underwriting and appraisal guidelines more accurately reflect economic benefits of high-performance features. NHB supports this voluntary program because it will not only ensure more accurate valuations, but it will have transformative effect in encouraging energy efficiency across the residential sector. In summary, I urge this subcommittee, when considering options to improve energy efficiency, to 1, ensure upgrades are cost-effective, defined as simple payback of 10 years or less, and their value is accurately reflected in mortgage instruments, appraisals, and other related documents. Maintain the Department of Energy's primary role as a technical advisor, as we heard this morning. 3, focus on highest impact, lowest cost reduction strategies that deliver true value to the consumer, including retrofitting the existing housing stock. And number 4, provide consistent incentives and market support to continue the development of high-performance building industry. I thank you for this opportunity, and welcome any questions when we get to that.
I want to thank you, Mr. Unger. Dr. Unger, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having spent many hours in the chairs against the back wall behind the subcommittee, it is my pleasure today to speak before you. Today I want to encourage you to send a Valentine to consumers and workers, to businesses, and to the environment in the form of energy efficiency, and specifically the 3 efficiency bills that are before you. We love energy efficiency policies because they help us all. They save consumers money, make businesses more competitive, create jobs, cut air pollution and global warming, improve our health and comfort, and strengthen resilience. I don't have time to talk about each of those, but the benefits are surprisingly large. We estimate that efficiency improvements since 1980 save almost $800 billion worth of energy each year. And as the chairman and Mr. Doyle have already said, the biggest energy savings are still ahead. We can cut our total energy use and greenhouse gas emissions in half. The bills before us today are not just sending flowers. The biggest gift is the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act. Congressman Welch and McKinley, along with their Senate colleagues, have worked hard over several years to bring dozens of stakeholders together and refine the bill to achieve its broad support. Yesterday, ACEEE released an updated analysis of key provisions in the bill. We project it would, over a few decades, save over $50 billion, that's net savings after investments, cut energy waste by as much energy as all U.S. industry uses in a year, and reduce carbon dioxide emissions by the amount released from all U.S. cars and light trucks in a year. That is sweet. Most of those savings would come from building energy codes. While codes may not set the heart aflutter, they are one of the most important energy efficiency policies. They limit energy waste in new homes and commercial buildings when it's cheapest to do so, and they make homes more affordable. And they are flexible and based on performance. Codes are mostly developed in stakeholder processes, adopted into law or regulation by states, and enforced by local code officials. The Department of Energy helps where it can, but too many new homes and buildings still leak air, have poor quality windows, and not enough insulation. The codes provisions in this bill, the first version of which was actually introduced by the late chairman of this committee, John Dingell, would keep the current codes process, but direct DOE to provide more guidance and assistance to increase savings. DOE would set energy savings targets, and then would work with code developers, states, and local governments to achieve the targets through better codes, faster adoption, and more effective compliance. But the bill would not force states or local governments to do anything. They would still decide what codes to adopt. The codes provision will be easier to implement with its partner, the SAVE Act, which is also in the Welch-McKinley bill. Homeowners with lower energy bills can afford a higher mortgage payment, and home buyers are willing to pay more for an efficient home, but they generally can't get a larger mortgage. This provision would direct federal agencies and enterprises to require their lenders to consider these important factors in underwriting mortgages if the borrower asks for it. SAVE will thus make it easier to finance energy efficiency improvements. One more important provision in the bill would expand industrial assessment centers. This program is a perfect marriage between workforce development and aid to small manufacturers. It trains students to help small and medium-sized plants reduce energy waste. With my little time remaining, I would like to recommend the other two efficiency bills as well. The Federal Energy and Water Management Performance Act would reinstate energy and water savings targets for federal buildings, and it would authorize DOE's important Federal Energy Management Program. The Ceiling Fan Improvement Act would use a new metric to improve the recent efficiency standard for large commercial ceiling fans. These three bills unite businesses, consumers, states, and environmentalists, and Democrats and Republicans. They are an important down payment on the tremendous potential of efficiency. We urge you to swipe right for them all. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I welcome any questions.
And the chair thanks the gentleman. Now the chair recognizes Ms. Schaefer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I'm Jennifer Schaefer with the Federal Performance Contracting Coalition. I'm pleased to testify today on behalf of the federal energy provisions in the suite of bills that you're discussing today. Our coalition is a national coalition of energy service companies that use private sector funding and expertise to improve our federal buildings. Our members, which are listed in our written testimony, are responsible for approximately 95% of all federal energy savings performance contracts, or ESPCs. That's significant. ESPCs right now are responsible for more than half of the government's intentional expenditures on energy efficiency upgrades. In fact, between 2016 and 2019, almost $7 billion of private sector investment through performance contracting was invested in the federal government to make them more efficient and paid back all over time with energy savings. And in an ESPC, as many of you are well familiar, an energy service company finances the energy efficiency upgrades, installs them at no upfront cost to the federal government, and then they also measure and verify and guarantee that the savings accrue. If the savings do not accrue, the energy service company pays the difference. For that reason, ESPCs mostly also include operations and maintenance, so we can make sure that the savings accrue to the federal government. ESPCs with the federal government are trending larger and more comprehensive. In large measure, that's because we're also doing a number of underfunded or unfunded priorities of the federal government, including cybersecurity and resiliency measures. We have a history of bipartisan support. We have a fabulous caucus chaired by Representatives Kinzinger, Welch, Moulton, and Hudson. This committee passed a bipartisan bill last year, H.R. 3079, a barrier reduction bill for performance contracting. We hope that and the bills today can become law fairly quickly. Our coalition strongly supports H.R. 5650. That's the Federal Energy and Water Management and Performance Act. It authorizes the Federal Energy Management Program at FEMP. FEMP is the go-to resource to assist agencies to become more resilient, efficient, and secure. The bill also directs new energy intensity reduction targets by the federal government. Our members are clear. Goals move performance. Without goals, we don't get performance. We haven't had goals since those developed under the Bush administration and authorized in EPAC 2005 expired about 5 years ago. We would certainly like to see those goals. We also support the water goals within that bill. Water is a bill payer of sorts for performance contracting. It's still very achievable, very inexpensive, and very necessary in our federal buildings. The FPCC also supports H.R. 3962, the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act. And we're going to talk today about mostly the provisions in Title IV, which are the federal energy provisions. The goals for water and energy efficiency are in that bill as well, as in the bill I just discussed. But importantly, Title IV also includes the requirement that agency audits already mandated under ESA 432 lead to actual energy projects if they're cost effective. For 13 years, the government has been required to audit their federal buildings for energy savings, but doesn't have to act and actually save energy and money for the federal government. According to performance.gov, 65,000 unimplemented yet cost-effective energy conservation measures worth at least $9 billion are sort of sitting on the shelf in these audits. That's with only half of the buildings audited. So we encourage that anything cost-effective should have to be implemented. It's a huge upside for my members, of course. It's a business proposition for us, but there's a huge upside for the federal government and the American taxpayer reducing energy use with no upfront cost. The FPCC also supports the rest of Title IV, including the retro commissioning provision. This entire section aims to strengthen federal energy efficiency and to replace the fossil fuel reduction mandate in ESA 433, which has been unimplementable as drafted. We additionally support sections 301 and 302 of the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act. Those are the Energy Efficient Government Technology Act and the Federal Data Center Bill. In conclusion, we strongly encourage the committee to move these bills quickly as a way to address energy, resilience, and climate in a cost-effective and bipartisan manner, and I'd be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
I want to thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Howard for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Rush, Ranking Member Upton, and subcommittee members, I'm greatly honored to project the mic better into my mouth and then also continue speaking. I'm greatly honored to join you and thank you on behalf of the U.S. Green Building Council. We commend the subcommittee for holding this hearing and calling attention to ways Congress can help accelerate progress on efficiency, clean energy, and building performance. With the available time, I wanted to summarize our perspective on the legislation before the subcommittee today. USGBC supports H.R. 5650, the Federal Energy and Water Management Performance Act of 2020. We commend Congressman Welch, Congressman Kitzinger, and their staffs for crafting a bipartisan approach to advance the performance of the federal footprint and providing formal authorization for the Federal Energy Management Program, or FEMP. The federal government has generally been a leader in reducing energy and water consumption of its own buildings with high-performance new construction, as well as energy performance contracts in existing buildings. In fact, in 2015, the U.S. Energy Information Administration attributed the reduction in building energy use as a contributing factor for energy consumption in the federal government being at its lowest levels since 1975. Efforts to reduce potable water and outdoor water use have also been impressive. Up until last year, the federal government had forward-looking targets for energy and water performance. Unfortunately, there is a gap in federal leadership, which is why this legislation is so critical. To that end, we support the provisions of the bill that would reinstate the building energy intensity reduction targets for federal buildings and would set reduction targets for potable water and outdoor water use. These provisions should be included in any comprehensive energy legislation being advanced by the committee. Provisions of the bill to assist the federal government with better infrastructure and stormwater management would bolster the stormwater runoff requirements in the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007. These approaches can increase the resilience of federal property while reducing the strain on local waterways, storm drains, and wastewater systems. We also want to appreciate the bill's explicit authorization for FEMP. This small but impactful program at DOE is critical in helping all agencies of the federal government use energy-related resources more wisely. While USGBC supports the bill, I would note that the authorization is shorter than the bipartisan Senate counterpart. Given the variance of reauthorizations for DOE, we would recommend the authorization be extended to 10 years. Turning our attention to H.R. 3962, the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act, I wanted to highlight important provisions of the bill and one that could benefit from changes. USGBC supports the code provisions in the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act. This section of the legislation is supported by real estate interests, manufacturers, consumers, and environmental groups. The role of DOE in the code activity is limited, but it is critical in providing technical assistance and accurate information to states and localities as they consider adoption. And I would note that efficient housing is important and critical to all segments of our communities. A study of efficient green certified apartments in Virginia found that residents saved an average of $54 a month or almost $650 annually on their electricity bills. This represents 3% of their household income. Energy efficiency helps those people save that money, and typically that goes right back into the local economies. So to put a real-life example on it, I think that's important to note. We also believe that the training and implementation provisions of the bill to assist in education and enforcement of codes is a critical piece of the equation. I also wanted to highlight our support for a provision of the bill related to appraisal and underwriting, which has already been spoken of. We support the voluntary approach to improving the accuracy of mortgage underwriting with regards to energy efficiency. The cost and value of efficiency must be better captured in the process if we want to see broader deployment of efficiency in existing homes and new construction. Finally, I did want to suggest a change to the bill. The provisions related to fossil fuel neutral buildings should not be eliminated, but updated. We would recommend modifying the goals to zero energy buildings or a net zero energy portfolio. This would allow a greater flexibility for agencies in accomplishing their mission while being consistent with the committee's goals of emissions reductions in the building sector. Since the law has never been regulated, we also support changing the compliance dates. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's truly an honor. I look forward to answering questions that you may have.
I want to thank you. We've now concluded the opening testimony from the witnesses, and now we will move to member questions. And I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Unger, in your testimony, you highlight the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act. Specifically, you detail its benefits, which include energy savings for consumers, cuts to energy waste, and improvements to air quality. in your view, what is the likely impact of this bill on job creation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did not analyze jobs impacts in this time. However, in the past, we have analyzed jobs impacts for previous versions of the bill. We believe that this bill would create net tens of thousands of jobs, likely over 100,000 jobs over a period of time. This comes both from the actual jobs implementing the efficiency measures, and it also comes from the energy savings. That money goes back into consumers' pockets. They can then spend that money, and that creates more jobs throughout the economy. In our analyses, we also include the fact that there's less money going into the energy sector, but on net, we find that it creates quite a large number of jobs. I'll also note that others have found that there's currently 2.3 million jobs working on energy efficiency. The number that was stated for Energy Star is actually low if you consider the whole range of jobs that are working on Energy Star products.
Each of you have mentioned in a positive sense the FEMP program. Can you, beginning with you, Mr. Unger, and any others who want to join in, what's your assessment of the FEMP program? What are its strengths and what are its weaknesses?
I'll just briefly say and then defer to others that we think the program is a very good one. The federal government should be a leader, and FEMP provides important assistance throughout the government, both on energy savings performance contracts and also in other ways of saving energy, both for new buildings and for existing buildings. I believe they have at times gotten behind a little bit on the federal standards for new buildings, so there certainly could be improvement, but it's a very important program and we certainly support authorizing it.
Anybody else want to?
Yeah, I would just, echo some of the comments. For us, FEMP pitches above or bats above their weight in terms of their performance versus their budget. They have an enormous role in terms of providing efficiency across the federal sphere. One of the areas that is not subject to this, but is certainly something that they're precluded from doing because of current law is the longer-term execution of power purchase agreements. Those are things that I know Congress has looked at in the past that certainly would merit review. In terms of some of the advice and some of the additional activities, I think, where we would sit is that they could, if they had additional authority, some of the work or the discussion that Ms. Schaefer had discussed around some of the clarity around ESPCs could be helpful. The other elements that could also be helpful, which aren't, they're precluded from doing in certain ways, or is how to bake in broader resiliency or other cyber activities in relation to performance contracting. There's some things that just because of the nature of what they might be looking at wouldn't be allowed to be baked into some of those opportunities, but have enormous potential.
Ms. Sherry, you have any additional comments?
Not much more than what these two gentlemen have talked about. I will say that they provide help to agencies in every way, whether they're federal, whether they're military, federal. They do interpretations. They hold the hands of individual managers at facilities to make sure they know what they're doing and how to do it, make sure they're getting a good deal from the private sector contractors if that's what they're doing. So they've just been incredible. They're moving towards doing more resiliency because that is a high priority, as is cybersecurity. Almost everything we do now includes cyber secure provisions. They don't pay for themselves. Those are the kind of things FEMP is working on, guidance on how one would incorporate that in a cost-effective manner. So there's just a ton that they do that's really important.
So would anybody oppose the thought that FEMP's budget should be increased?
I think what FEMP would tell you is that, and maybe speaking for them, I don't know. I guess what I'd say is they're doing very well with the budget they have. They're short-staffed at the moment, so just more money probably isn't going to be hugely impactful right now. But yes, there are a lot more things they could be doing. Right now, their core budget is about $28 million.
That concludes my time. I now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was sorry that I had to be absent to miss some of the testimony, but appreciated getting copies of it for sure. I have a couple of questions. Thanks for bearing with us as we have a number of different subcommittees that are meeting today. They're still meeting downstairs. Mr. McIntyre, you're a little bit in the hot seat today in that one of the things that this committee prides itself on over the last number of years, both under Chairman Pallone and Walden, and when I was chairman, was to really try and build a bipartisan consensus on a number of things. And I can remember when I first took over as chair, I urged my colleagues, I was then sitting where this guy was, and my colleagues to the right to work with the colleagues on the left to get things done. And that's really what they did on 3962. Mr. McKinley, who's here, Republican, Mr. Welch, good Democrat, really worked together on building codes and worked very closely with our colleagues in the Senate, Mr. Portman and Ms. Sheen, to do a bill. And the home builders, I guess, put it nicely, have not been terribly excited about it, to say the least. But what do you think that there is a fair compromise that would many sides would support as it relates to the building sector for energy efficiencies and different products that they might have?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Upton.
And again, I'm sorry I wasn't here for your testimony. I raced.
No, that's fine. That's fine. First of all, I want to make a kind of a quick statement because I didn't cover it in my beginning of my perspective that's sitting here at the table. I'm a builder. I'm also a high-performance builder. I'm a ResNet rater. I'm a code inspector, building inspector. I'm a Michigan real estate broker. So I have a lot of different perspectives. Most of them involve the consumer, the person that's paying for all this, in getting the value out of it. So a lot of my answers are going to come from that direction. So when you ask about the compromise, one of the key issues I think right now is the cost effectiveness and how we measure that, how we value that, how we equate that to the consumer. So getting over that hurdle is going to be a key piece of it. I've heard different interpretations, different revisions of what that cost effectiveness is, how many years from DOE's current method to what this bill is proposing, how the DOE acts to what the consumer wants. And I know what the consumer wants. That's what I deal with every day. And so the cost effectiveness of it and the programs that promote cost effectiveness of this bill are a key hurdle. So if we can get over that, we can come to some consensus
And
there.
what do you think the sweet spot would be in terms of the time length for a payback period? 5 years?
Well,
10 years?
I'll tell you how it goes
Well, where do you think
when I
most
sit down,
consumers are?
and I do this all the time with consumers. I got one Friday. I got a new homeowner coming in, their second meeting. That's going to be part of their questions. The general consumer is going to be looking for a 3 to 5 year payback. That's what they're going to, it doesn't come up in the initial meetings, but as we're trying to sell this, and believe me, we build these, folks. We build it. We're an Energy Star builder. We're a HERS builder. So we're promoting this. And as that comes up in conversation, they're looking for that 3 to 5 year payback. I can usually get them to the 7 year point with everything we're talking about here. The utilities and all those types of things, we can get them to that point. Once you get past that, you pretty much have lost them. They're generally not interested in costs beyond that, costs that are going to be incurred beyond that for a number of reasons.
Ms. Speaks-Backman, again, my apology that I wasn't here for your oral testimony, but one of the issues with new technologies and systems for energy storage, of course, the concern about cyber attacks. Can you expound a little bit more beyond where you are, what you might have said before?
Well, controls, is this on now?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Sorry about that. The controls of energy storage devices are really the brains behind how this is operated and how it makes the grid itself more resilient, more efficient, more sustainable, and portable. Cybersecurity is central to that interest and that concern that our members have as the industry. And so we have been very supportive of the work that DOE has done, especially in opening their new office. And we stand ready to be helpful in any way that we can.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. McNerney. Mr. Doyle, sorry.
You
Mr.
almost got in
McNerney.
front of me.
Mr. Doyle for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said during the first panel, I think expanding our use of energy efficiency and energy storage is going to be critical if we're going to reach our climate goals. Ms. Speaks-Backman, since energy storage systems of all sizes and duration can play an important role in our energy systems, do you believe that the technical assistance and grant created by the Promoting Grid Storage Act will help expand the deployment of innovative storage technologies? Absolutely. And how about if we paired that program as well as more research and development at DOE with an investment tax credit for storage, like my Energy Storage Tax Incentive and Deployment Act provides? Would that be helpful to deploying more energy storage?
To be frank, there is no policy that is more impactful than the storage ITC for standalone storage resources, and I appreciate your leadership in that.
So you see that as that this incentive is really critical to spur the development of solutions to the challenge of developing long-duration storage.
Absolutely. Studies have shown 16% increase in deployment in each and every year because of the storage ITC.
Thank you. Dr. Unger, I understand there's concern of that having too many requirements may discourage people from buying homes or making them less affordable, but I believe that H.R. 3962 tries to address this by incorporating economic and cost considerations from the perspective of the building owners and tenants as model energy codes are being developed, including return on investment analysis. Can you explain why looking at the life cycle cost effectiveness of energy efficiency improvements is the best way to protect and ensure savings for homeowners?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Homes don't just last for 10 years, they last for decades. And it's not just the first homeowner, but the one after that and the one after that who are going to be affected by the energy efficiency features of the home. We need to take all of that into consideration. I'd also note that there's the financial considerations are more complicated than just a simple payback. There are some provisions in codes for which you can't quantify the payback. There may be information or other provisions which are part of a larger package that save energy or that make the home safer and have better air quality that you couldn't calculate simple payback, but which are important to the overall picture. And so we think it's important to look at the broader economic considerations, and in general, that means the life cycle cost effectiveness. But we wouldn't say just use that metric. There's multiple metrics you can look at, but it's important to take the whole picture into account.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the Department of Energy can already set energy targets for residential model building codes today, right?
The Department of Energy did actually, back in the George W. Bush administration, the administration announced in codes hearings a goal of achieving 30% savings for codes. They did that actually without a public process and careful kind of deliberation that this bill would require. The model codes did not achieve it in the next cycle, but ultimately they did achieve that 30% savings.
Yeah, I mean, the target, these were non-binding, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It wasn't, the federal government cannot force the independent code organizations or the states to do things. In this case, they said, this is what we think is needed in order to achieve our energy goals. And the processes took that into account. As I said, they did not respond immediately, but ultimately, and because there were many others who were also looking for those savings, they ultimately responded, and the codes did improve.
Thank you. Mr. Howard, while ensuring that new buildings are as energy efficient as possible is important, we already have millions of existing buildings in the United States that are not going to be torn down anytime soon. So what policy recommendations do you have for how to improve the efficiency of existing buildings?
Well, thank you for the question, and again, appreciate all the work that the committee has been doing on these subjects. Certainly, one of the areas that I would flag that the committee has been considering is Congressman Tonko's legislation on updating and enhancing the existing weatherization program. There are the capacity for that program, is well beyond its means in terms of what can handle in that process now. Those are things that are immediately impactful for communities all across the country, and especially communities who have, or people who have, significant, means in terms of not being able to pay for a utility bill. So that's one obvious, easy one. There's others that I can follow up with your staff about.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
With due respect, the chair now recognizes Mr. Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the panel for joining us today, and I just want to let you know I'm on the same page that many of you are. I was just checking my home energy management system, and since 2013, my net energy usage is down 36%, and my solar panels have moved up from 31% of my annual usage to 44.6%, so I'm on the same page. Have a difference of opinion maybe on how we get there from time to time. So, Mr. McIntyre, let's start with you. What is the one thing that the federal government could do from a regulatory standpoint, court perspective, whatever, that would help? What's the one technology or measure that would make implementing energy efficiency more attractive to your home builders and also to homeowners?
Well, the one thing is going to translate into two or three, and that one thing is delivering value to the consumer. Putting it in a package that the consumer realizes and receives value from it, and that's done a number of ways or with a number of components. Number one is cost. First, cost is important. We can all sit here and talk about all the payback and everything, and I don't disagree with that, and we don't disagree against energy efficiency. The consumer sees that first, and then you got to get over that hurdle. So keeping the cost in check, having incentive programs in place, tax incentives or what have you that are in place that help address that. And address it consistently, not here today, gone tomorrow, back again the next day, and then gone the next day and back again the next day, like they have been for the last several years. Consistent, ongoing, repetitive. So that's an important one. Secondly is going to be, as part of that equation, is the life cycle cost or the life cycle payback. The consumer, the appraisal institute and appraisals. Right now, we do not effectively recognize the value of energy features. I'm going to call them energy features because there's all kinds of them. They're just like a granite countertop or tile floors. Doesn't effectively recognize that. So now, if we don't have that 2, 3, 5, 7 year payback, and the average homeowner used to live in their home 7 years, now it's up to near 13. If they don't receive that payback in that first period of time before they sell that home and they move, they've lost that and it's never regained. So they need to receive it when they sell the home. So if they get a part of it in utility payback, they get the rest when they sell the home. That comes with the appraisals, addressing the appraisals, getting it recognized so the appraisers have a tool to go to, treat it just like a granite countertop or a tile floor. Those are two areas that would be key.
Okay, thank you. I have another question for you, Mr. McIntyre and Ms. Hermoto. I'd like to ask you to answer this one as well. Some jurisdictions are starting to try to ban the delivery of natural gas to commercial buildings and also to homes. And some folks are concerned that the building code language in H.R. 3962 would worsen those attempts to reduce consumers' choice of energy. So my question is this: will consumers still be able to have natural gas delivered to their homes and businesses should these codes be enacted? Start with you, Mr. McIntyre.
Well, the first thing I would say is consumers should have a choice to have natural gas or electricity or their choice.
Okay.
First and foremost. But secondly, with the stretch codes that are in this legislation, that is going to drive more to source generated utilities, which is going to lead you to electric. When you get to electric, and I understand you've got panels, I have them also, our utility company doesn't allow you to generate more than what you use on average. So you can't make up, if you have natural gas in the home, you can't make up for that to get to net zero by generating excess electricity. So in essence, it drives you away from natural gas and more toward electricity just out of default in the code language.
Ms. Hiramoto, what are your thoughts on this?
I think the variability of energy sources is important, but so is the clear goal of a net zero carbon future. And if we're able to define ways where we can get to zero, which is a very clear and distinguishable and simple goal, then it will require us to move away from fossil fuels and to more renewable sources of energy.
And Ms. McIntyre, we've got a few seconds left, so I'd like to ask you a question. Who is the hardest impacted by tight energy standards for a new construction?
Was that to me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What income group is most?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Okay, what income group is most heavily impacted by tight energy efficiency standards on new
Low
homes?
cost,
Yeah.
low income, or low income.
And so you could have a perverse standard of it increases the home price so much that a low-income buyer can't get into it, and then they're stuck where they are in a high-energy use situation. So I guess the key point is we need balance. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. McNerney for 5 minutes.
I want to thank the chairman for recognizing me. I thank the witnesses too. I appreciate your testimony. The very inputs is important to us developing good legislation. Ms. Speaker Backman, thanks for testimony. You highlighted the storage's unique flexibility among all the grid's resources with good reason. Can you speak more about how this beacon on the electric grid can efficiently ensure that supply and demand reliably match?
Thank you for the question, and especially thank you for the question now that my mic works. I was feeling a little incompetent there, so thanks so much. Yeah, so the very exciting thing about energy storage is never in the history of the electricity industry have we had a time when we can decouple the element, have the element of time decoupled from when you're generating it and when you're delivering it. And so because of that, you can make the generation sources more efficient. Their capacity factor moves up quite a bit because you can store that energy when it's generating and you don't need it and bring it out to the grid during times of higher demand. During times, actually, when it comes to the carbon impact, during times when often the carbon impact of generation is higher with the peaking plants. And so it helps to even out the assets that are already on the grid, but it also helps on the transmission and the distribution side in terms of making the grid itself more efficient in increasing the capacity factor there.
Well, I think of the challenge is the massive amount of energy that needs to be stored if the grid, if you're depending on wind or solar over a period of a couple of days or even a week. What's the biggest challenge in your mind in terms of getting to that place where we can rely on storage to fill in that gap for a long period of time?
So right now with the penetration of variable resources like wind and solar, we're not really at a current crisis period where we need to have these long duration seasonal storage or daily storage, but we will get there if the projections are correct in more solar and wind on the grid. And so this is why I think bills such as the Promoting Grid Storage Act are so important in that it's going to help with the research and development of cost-effective long-term storage. And we're very excited about that prospect.
Sounds good. I hope we get there.
I do.
What about the resilience and reliability aspects of storage?
Right. So at least for the battery storage that's on the grid, the micro interruptions, the ability to manage regulation on the grid, the frequency regulation, is insurmountable. This is sort of how storage as a modern deployment trend became so in PJM territory. So on reliability and resilience for short term, those batteries are right there. And for pumped hydro and for some of the mechanical storage technologies that are there for a little bit longer term, reliability and resilience for batteries and for other technologies to be there on the grid when generation goes down is really important, especially in wintertime and up in the Northeast.
Good. Well, I feel guilty. I'm not going to be able to ask every one of you a question, but I'll move forward. Dr. Unger, Mr. McIntyre cites that H.R. 3962 will allow Department of Energy to hijack the building code development process. But the legislation is intended to ensure that DOE conducts open, public process for setting energy savings targets, including publishing its analysis, evaluating a wide range of economic impacts, such as a return on investment. Additionally, the targets themselves are ultimately non-binding. There is nothing in the legislation that requires the code developers to meet those targets. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Can the Department of Energy right now, today, set targets for residential model and building codes?
As I said, they can do it right now, and they have.
So this legislation doesn't impose anything additional?
It
Other
would
than-
encourage DOE to set targets and would also encourage them to provide more assistance to the code-setting bodies as well as others. That's not hijacking the process. DOE participates in the process already. Their technical assistance has been invaluable in that process, and so it's not creating something new. It's encouraging DOE to do more effectively what they're already doing.
Okay, all right, Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time.
Goes back, the chair now recognizes Mr. McKinley for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McIntyre, let me just pass on just one comment to the West Virginia Home Builders Association. Kent Pauley does a fabulous job in West Virginia representing home builders. He and I have had conversation after conversation about this because we want to make sure we're reaching some form of compromise on this legislation. Because we well know, and Kent understands it, is that if it's not bipartisan, it ain't going to happen. And so we've been trying to work in a bipartisan fashion. Otherwise, we're going to have the status quo. Status quo has been a little bit of a problem in energy consumption, energy policy. So we're trying to work something out. So I appreciate some of the comments that you've raised. I've heard little conditioned love on this 3962. I didn't see anyone really embracing it as I was hoped for, but I'm a realist on what this is. But I'd like to go back to Hiromoto. My firm was an engineering firm. We were an EA. Now, for people in here who don't know what that means, is an EA firm rather than an AE firm. So it wouldn't be the first time that I would disagree with architects. I made a point of disagreeing with architects in our firm. So in this case, I want people to understand the section 433 that you said, well, only if that's out will you support it. That's what I heard. Am I correct? Only if it's out will you support this bill. Well, make sure the people understand 4033. If I can just read this one, it established a requirement 433. We're repealing that so that fossil fuel energy consumption of buildings reduced to 0 by the year 2030. That's pretty draconian. And for people that espouse to say, I want an all of the energy approach, that doesn't do that. That says we don't want gas, coal, oil used to create energy. So I'm going to fight you on this, okay? And I think a lot of folks will. And so it's a matter we would find a compromise. Whether it's not, as Mr. Howard said, we change the date, but look at ways, because that's what we want to do is innovation to be able to do that. But let's switch back over. So Mr. Unger, I think I heard Doyle say it, and just heard McNerney say the same thing, is currently the DOE can set targets for the residential building, the model building code. Would this legislation, I want to make sure this is clear on it, would this legislation be a departure on how codes have been traditionally developed?
This legislation keeps in place the process by which codes are developed and adopted. What it would do is encourage DOE to extend what it already does in helping all the way through the process.
And there's been, when the conversation with the West Virginia Home Builders Association and the National Home has been, are we going to do away with the, or is it going to go one size fits all? Because what would be appropriate in Washington or Texas is different than it would be in West Virginia. So can you give us some assurance that what your impression from the IECC building code, would it be broken down by code sections of the country as well?
Oh, absolutely. The codes already
are divided into 8 different climate regions. Those regions, by the way, were developed by Pacific Northwest National Lab on behalf of DOE. It's the kind of technical assistance that DOE provides. The requirements for building envelope and for many different things vary by region. And then, of course, each state can look at those and make sure that it makes sense for that state. But yes, they already are set by climate.
And Mr. Polly also brought up the point, and I think many people here in this panel have talked about the additional costs that could be incurred. And that's why I was raising that question back. I don't know, you were there when I was challenging the Secretary about that, could it exacerbate the problem of affordable housing by that? And you heard his testimony that it would not. And they're going to do everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen. But so would this legislation help home buyers afford the upfront capital cost of energy efficiency?
So the legislation would both help afford the upfront costs particularly through the SAVE Act provision that would account for the energy efficiency in mortgage underwriting, so that home buyers could get a larger mortgage if they're buying a home in which they can afford to pay a larger mortgage, in which the home is more valuable. In addition, affordability is not just the upfront cost. Those home buyers have to be able to afford to pay the monthly costs of home, and that includes the mortgage and it includes the energy costs. And it would help lower those costs and make homes more affordable.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back. My point here is I just want to make sure that DOE does not use a heavy hand as they set this assistance with it. And I got the impression from the Secretary they're not going to do that, but I just want to make sure that the panel understands. We're trying to make sure it's no heavy hand.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Rush, and thank you to our panel. We know 40% of domestic energy use is associated with residential and commercial buildings. These are long-lived assets with slow stock turnover, so it is critical that new buildings are energy efficient, and I believe building codes play an important role. I certainly appreciate the bipartisan consensus-based approach in Mr. Welch and Mr. McKinley's bill, and I think we can even go further, but I do commend them on the efforts they have made. Dr. Unger, can you explain DOE's role in developing model codes?
Certainly. Model codes are set through stakeholder process. The federal government recognizes the International Energy Conservation Code sent by the International Code Council for residential and the ASHRAE Standard 90.1 for commercial. Their processes are actually quite different, but they both involve stakeholders and they both refer to them as consensus processes. DOE's role in that is primarily to provide technical assistance. I mentioned one case where there were more climate regions. There was a desire to simplify the codes, and so DOE helped to determine which county should go in which climate region to make the codes as effective as possible. DOE also can propose amendments and has. Those amendments then are considered in the same process that amendments that anyone else, including us, may propose. But DOE will do that, and because they have their resources, they can do that with, particularly with very strong technical backing and show why they think these amendments are important. They also provide technical assistance to states and sometimes financial assistance to both the code setting bodies and the states.
Yeah. The sponsor, Representative Welch, couldn't be with us today, but he and I share some concerns, and he wanted some questions on the record. So would this legislation mandate that any state, local government, or tribe adopt those codes?
No.
Okay. Can you give us a sense of how strengthened codes would make new homes more valuable and save homeowners energy and money?
As you've heard already today, homeowners recognize that there is value in energy-efficient homes, and there's significant evidence that they are willing to pay more for homes. Unfortunately, the current appraisal process doesn't usually recognize that. I've seen that in my own home with the ground source heat pump, where generally that's ascribed no value, even though it's keeping my energy bills low. And we know from the condo that I live in that people will pay more for them.
they help keep homes affordable by allowing people to pay the cost of owning a home. That includes the energy costs. And when you add in the small added extra cost of the mortgage and the much larger energy savings that people get, that makes it more affordable so that they can stay in their homes, which is very important.
Well, so any upfront cost increases would be made up in savings fairly quickly, I would assume.
So PNNL, again, has analyzed codes. If you look, not the most recent code, which had almost no savings, but at previous codes, one of the ways you can look at it, and I think is effective, is to say, how long does it take for a home buyer to come out ahead? There's a little bit more in the down payment they have to pay and a little bit more in the mortgage, and then they're receiving energy savings. PNNL has analyzed that for most states, and usually that time to come out ahead on a cash flow basis is in months, not years, months.
And how would the bill ensure DOE's process is more open and more transparent?
The bill has multiple provisions to require DOE to go through a rulemaking process, to receive comments, to publish the methodology by which they do the analyses. It's a major concern of the bill, both on transparency and for public input.
Thank you. And Ms. Speaks Backman, in New York City, storage has been deployed as a non-wire solution to avoid new T&D infrastructure. How can we best ensure storage is given proper consideration in planning processes for all of its grid benefits?
Thank you very much for the question. We've seen a lot of activity from utilities, the investor-owned utilities, as well as municipals and co-ops, but not enough yet. Where what we're suggesting to them is that you cross the silos. You take the generation long-term planning, you take the transmission or the distribution long-term planning, and you look at a single asset across all three of those planning processes and coordinate it. We heard an example yesterday of Duke Energy actually doing exactly that, and because of it, they have saved millions of dollars in transmission and distribution upgrades by installing energy storage instead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I believe I'm out of time.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes Ms. Berrigan for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, for holding this hearing and for our panelists for being here today. You give me just a moment here. I wanted to take an opportunity to mention a bill by my colleague who couldn't be here today, Congressmember Peter Welch, who has a building codes provisions. It's the Welch-McKinley bill. It's H.R. 3962. It's a bill that will strengthen national model building codes to make new homes and commercial buildings more energy efficient and code writing process more transparent. It's important, I think, that we, as we have a conversation about energy efficiency and we have a conversation about how do we get to 100% clean by 2050, that we take into consideration efficiency and we take into consideration on what we can be doing as a Congress. I want to first apologize. There's a competing hearing downstairs on women's reproductive issues. And so I've been running back and forth, and I've missed a bit of the conversation that's been happening here today. So I apologize if some of this is a little redundant. Mr. Howard, I'm going to go to you as somebody who's with the U.S. Green Building Council to, if you could just elaborate a little bit on if you have any thoughts on any of the pending bills, or certainly Mr. Welch's bills, on making sure that Congress is considering what we need to for.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, certainly I would reiterate from some of my written testimony that, the work that's been done around comprehensive energy management for federal facilities is really important. Having strong energy and water goals for an extended period of time is really important, and that we lack the critical needs of federal leadership in those areas. In addition, I would say that we have spoken in great lengths about codes and the code process, within DOE and the proposed legislation. I would reiterate that the process of advising and providing technical assistance to states and localities as they look at this is a voluntary option. You know, it is certainly something that is supported by a broad group of stakeholders, whether it's, you know, real estate interests, you know, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, others look at the code development processes that are in the comprehensive energy bill as a win-win for consumers as well as efficiency.
Great, thank you. Dr. Unger, I understand that your organization has done an analysis of the bill HR 3962. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that it shows a cumulative carbon emissions reductions through 2050 of 1.3 billion tons. Where do the vast majority of those reductions come from in this bill?
By far the largest portion of those reductions come from the building energy codes provisions. It can be challenging to analyze, but those codes affect homes and commercial buildings throughout the country. And when you make improvements, those improvements last for decades. And so we find that those are really significant energy savings.
Great. Dr. Unger, I'm also interested in developing programs and opportunities where people and marginalized communities facing energy insecurity and energy-related pollution can gain access to energy efficiency careers. How can these energy efficiency and building codes bills help to accomplish this?
Well, so training and assistance for really for the workforce as a whole, but particular for underserved communities is very important. The bill you mentioned, the Welch-McKinley bill, actually has two provisions on training that are important. One I mentioned in my testimony is on industrial assessment centers. These centers are located in communities throughout the country, and they help people train students to manage industrial energy use and do energy audits, and then to use those to help small and medium-sized manufacturing plants become more efficient. The bill proposes to extend those to community colleges and to labor training programs and other places where they may be even more effective in reaching underserved communities. In addition, I'll mention there's a similar program for buildings that does not exist yet, but would be authorized in this bill called Building Training Assessment Centers. And those would apply the same thing on the building side, which is even more widespread to help energy management in buildings.
Well, great. Thank you to our panelists, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. This concludes the witness questions, and I certainly want to once again thank all of our witnesses for your participation. And I just want to add a note to Dr. Unger. Thank you so much again for being here. You were a fellow for a former member, Markey, who was in this committee, and so we recall your participation very fondly. So thank you again and welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I remind members that pursuant to committee rules that they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record to be answered by the witnesses who have appeared before this subcommittee. And I ask each witness to respond promptly to any such questions that you may receive. And I would also ask for unanimous consent that the following documents be entered into the record: a letter from the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association in support of H.R. 4447, a coalition letter in support of legislation to address the energy conservation standards for ceiling fans, a coalition letter in support of H.R. 3962, a letter from the Real Estate Roundtable in support of H.R. 3962, a letter from the Grand Canyon State Electric Cooperative Association in support of H.R. 4447, a letter from the Consumer Technology Association in support of H.R. 3962, a letter from the American Public Gas Association in support of H.R. 3962, a PowerPoint presentation on the Department of Energy's investment in research and development from fiscal years 2017 through 2019 for energy storage, a letter from the Sierra Club in support of H.R. 3962, a letter from a Kentucky fan company in support of H.R. 5847, and seeing no objection, these documents are entered into the record without objection. And this concludes the subcommittee hearing, and I want to thank you once again. At this time, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
All right. Yeah, all right. Congratulations. Yeah, thanks. Yeah,
Grandma.
yeah, I had a grandson.